De acuerdo a un convenio con el líder de la minoría, los señores Ruskin y Nadler participarán hoy para declaraciones iniciales y para hacer preguntas al testigo. Cada uno tendrá 3 minutos para una declaración inicial y 5 minutos para hacerle preguntas al testigo. Inicia la presidencia. Robert Hur fue designado fiscal especial el 12 de enero de 2023. Tenía que encarar una pregunta fundamental. ¿Joe Biden se retuvo de manera ilegal documento? La respuesta es sí. En la página 1, en su reporte, él dice, nuestra investigación descubrió evidencia que el presidente Biden voluntariamente se retuvo documentos clasificados después de su vicepresidencia como ciudadano privado. Igualmente, retuvo documentos marcados como clasificados sobre Afganistán y notas escritas en su cuaderno que tenía en lugares no protegidos en su residencia. Joe Biden retuvo esta información y él no almacenó esta información de manera apropiada. El señor Hur hizo estas determinaciones después de entrevistar a 147 testigos, de examinar 7 millones de documentos, incluyendo correos electrónicos, mensajes de texto, fotografías, videos y otros materiales clasificados y no clasificados. Pero hay más. Joe Biden no solamente retuvo esta información que no podía retener y no solamente no la resguardó apropiadamente, él también compartió esta información con gente que no tenía autorización para tener acceso a ese material. Compartió esa información con la persona que le escribe sus materiales. El señor Hur dice en la página 200 de su reporte que este es el tipo de información que puede causarle daño severo a la seguridad nacional de Estados Unidos. ¿Qué dice Joe Biden respecto a esto? ¿Cuál fue su explicación? En la página 94 del reporte del señor Hur, Joe Biden dice que él se llevó sus notas después que terminó la vicepresidencia porque eran de su propiedad. Y todos los presidentes antes que él habían hecho todos lo mismo. No hay que prestar atención al hecho de que él no había sido presidente para ese entonces y uno puede sentir la arrogancia en su declaración. Esto es mío. Pero con todo y eso, el señor Hur decidió no formularle cargos porque, cito, el señor Biden quiere presentarse ante un jurado, como lo hizo en nuestra entrevista, como un anciano bien intencionado con fallas de memoria, un viejo olvidadizo que, según el señor Hur, no recordaba cuándo fue vicepresidente, se le olvidaba cuándo terminó su gestión y en el segundo día de la entrevista se le olvidó cuándo comenzó su gestión como vicepresidente. El señor Hur presentó un reporte de más de 300 páginas, pero esto se reduce a algunos elementos cruciales. Joe Biden retuvo información confidencial, Joe Biden no protegió esta información apropiadamente y Joe Biden compartió esta información con gente con la que no tenía que haberla compartido. Joe Biden quebrantó la ley, pero como es un viejo olvidadizo que le caería simpático al jurado, el fiscal decidió no formularle cargos. Señor Hur, nos parece que es importante que usted responda frente a lo que dijo el presidente Biden. Vamos a ver un breve video de la conferencia de prensa del presidente Biden después que se dio a conocer su reporte, porque aquí hay elementos que contradicen sus determinaciones en este reporte. ¿Video? Déjenme decir algunas cosas antes de pasar a sus preguntas. Como ustedes saben, el fiscal especial dio a conocer sus determinaciones hoy respecto a la forma en que yo manejé documentos confidenciales. Presidente Biden, algo que dice el reporte del fiscal es que una razón por la que no lo encausaron es porque en su descripción usted es un anciano bien intencionado con fallas de memoria. Soy un viejo, soy bien intencionado y sé lo que estoy haciendo y lo que he hecho como vicepresidente no necesito su recomendación. En cuanto a su memoria, ¿puede usted continuar siendo presidente? Mi memoria es tan mala que te dejo hablar. Mi memoria está bien. Vean lo que yo he hecho desde que asumí la presidencia. Nadie pensaba que yo lograría que se aprobara lo que se ha aprobado. ¿Cómo ocurrió eso? Bueno, quizás se les ha olvidado lo que pasó. Señor presidente, en cuanto a las preocupaciones que se expresan en este reporte, ¿asume usted la responsabilidad por el manejo descuidado de material confidencial? Yo asumo responsabilidad por no haber revisado lo que estaba haciendo mi personal. Hay cosas que aparecieron en mi garaje o que estaban en mi casa, cosas que no me las llevé yo, se las llevó mi personal. Durante meses le han preguntado sobre su edad y usted dice, obsérvenme. Bueno, muchos estadounidenses lo han estado observando y han expresado preocupación sobre su edad. Esa es su opinión. Es su opinión. Hay preocupaciones sobre su agudeza mental. Se dice que usted es muy viejo. Usted me dijo, señor presidente, que otros demócratas podían derrotar a Donald Trump. ¿Por qué tiene que ser usted? Soy la persona más calificada para ser presidente de los Estados Unidos y completar el trabajo. Yo no he compartido información confidencial con mi escritor. Se los aseguro que no. Yo no dije eso. La realidad es que yo no lo he leído en detalle. Yo escribí un largo memorando al presidente Obama sobre por qué no deberíamos estar en Afganistán. Es un documento de múltiples páginas y dije que era confidencial. Lo que quise decir es que era algo privado porque era un contacto entre el presidente y el vicepresidente. A eso es a lo que se refiere. No era información confidencial lo que había en ese documento. En retrospectiva sobre este incidente, ¿hay algo que usted haría diferente en este momento? ¿Y piensa que el fiscal, se debe haber nombrado un fiscal especial en estos casos? Primero que nada, lo que yo habría hecho es supervisar la transferencia del material que había en mis oficinas. Debía haber hecho eso en retrospectiva. Esto lo hizo mi personal y así se señala en el reporte. Y mi personal no hizo esto adecuadamente. Por ejemplo, no sé cómo esas cajas llegaron a mi garaje. Ah, las pusieron allí, en el garaje de mi casa. Y todo lo que estaba en mi casa estaba en archivadores con llave. Esto estaba en mi casa. No es que esto estaba en un lugar público como Mar-a-Lago. Y nada de esto era material altamente clasificado. Nada de eso. Yo hubiera querido prestar más atención al manejo de estos documentos. Pensé que estaban siendo llevados a los archivos. Eso fue lo que yo pensé. La última parte de su pregunta, ¿se debió designar a un fiscal especial en este caso? Creo que se debió nombrar un fiscal especial y pienso que es así. Es porque no quiero estar en una posición en la que vean a Trump y después me vean a mí, comparando con lo que yo hice como vicepresidente y deriven conclusiones. Yo no quebranté la ley, punto. Muchas gracias a todos. Yo soy de la opinión, como ustedes saben, que la respuesta en la Franja de Gaza ha sido algo exagerado. Como ustedes saben, inicialmente el presidente del Sisi, el presidente de México, no estaba abriendo las puertas para que pasara la ayuda humanitaria. Yo lo convencí para que lo hiciera. Reconocimiento pleno en el Oriente Medio y los compromisos de Estados Unidos y las propuestas que teníamos. No voy a entrar en detalles sobre esos temas, pero una de estas cosas fue para lidiar con la protección contra su enemigo en el noroeste, o quise decir noreste, y para darles municiones para que se defendieran. Por coincidencia, es el periodo en que esto estalló. No tengo pruebas de lo que les voy a decir, pero se puede asumir que jamás pudo intuir lo que se avecinaba. Tiene la palabra el señor Nadler para una declaración inicial. Señor presidente, la admiración por el presidente tal que le dio los primeros 10 minutos de esta audiencia. ¿Cómo va el presidente a convencer al país que los hombres blancos están en el lado perdedor del sistema judicial? Lo que dice la gente de MAGA no tiene base en la realidad, pero estos comentarios hacen pensar si usted leyó el informe del fiscal especial. El reporte nos ayuda a distinguir entre el presidente Biden y Donald Trump. Eso no es lo que usted quiere. Hay dos distinciones aquí. Primero, el reporte claramente indica que en ningún momento el fiscal especial encontró evidencia que el señor Biden hubiera tenido la intención de retener esta información para beneficiar a agentes extranjeros. En cuanto a los documentos confidenciales en poder del presidente Biden, la decisión de no presentar cargos criminales fue algo muy claro. Fin de la cita. Y respecto a la investigación del fiscal especial, el señor Biden entregó los documentos a los archivos nacionales del Departamento de Justicia. Accedió a la revisión de múltiples lugares, incluyendo su residencia. Se sentó para entrevistas voluntarias y cooperó con la investigación. Fin de la cita. El presidente Biden actuó de manera responsable, cooperó plenamente y la decisión de no formularle cargos fue algo relativamente claro. En corto, para tomar una frase del gobierno pasado, este reporte representa una total exoneración del presidente Biden. ¿Y cómo contrasta eso con el presidente Trump? Los documentos que él retuvo y los cargos pendientes contra él en Florida. Sabemos que Trump deliberadamente se llevó gran cantidad de material confidencial que estaba en la Casa Blanca. Él lo ha admitido. En ocasiones ha pretendido que él desclasificó esta información sin decirle a nadie cuando se estaba marchando. Sabemos que esta información estaba en los lugares más locos de Mar-a-Lago, en closets, en un baño, cerca de un sanitario. Cuando fue entrevistado, dijo, como presidente yo pude haber desclasificado estos documentos, dice en la grabación. Ahora no puedo, pero esto sigue siendo secreto. Fin de la cita. ¿Qué tal con la teoría de la desclasificación? Hemos dicho que Trump ha compartido esta información con visitantes de Mar-a-Lago y lo sabemos a pesar de esta conducta escandalosa. El Departamento de Justicia le dio a Trump todas las oportunidades para evitar la formulación de cargos criminales. Nuevamente, las palabras del fiscal especial, después que se le dieron múltiples oportunidades para devolver los documentos y evitar ser procesado, el señor Trump hizo lo contrario. No solamente se negó a devolver los documentos durante meses, sino que obstruyó la justicia, buscando a otros para que destruyeran evidencia y mintieran al respecto. Fin de la cita. ¿Por qué se decidió encausar al expresidente Trump, pero no al presidente Biden? No por una conspiración de gran escala o porque se lo esté persiguiendo, sino porque el expresidente Trump fundamentalmente era incapaz de aprovechar siquiera una de las múltiples oportunidades que se le dieron para evitar la formulación de cargos, lo cual me lleva a la segunda distinción con este reporte en el caso del presidente Biden y el caso del presidente Trump. En términos simples, el presidente Biden tiene la agudeza mental para navegar esta situación. Donald Trump no. Se ha dicho mucho de los comentarios gratuitos del fiscal especial sobre la edad del presidente Biden. Pero pongamos esto en contexto. Después de devolver todos los documentos confidenciales y de abrir su residencia a investigadores federales y de manejar las primeras horas de la crisis en Israel, el presidente Biden voluntariamente se sentó para una entrevista de 5 horas con el fiscal especial. Creo que, como es su costumbre, el presidente Biden probablemente cometió una que otra equivocación cuando estaba hablando. Y no creo que eso cuente porque cuando terminó la entrevista, el señor Hur exoneró completamente al presidente Biden. Y después está el caso de Donald Trump. ¿Qué clase de hombre desperdicia docenas de oportunidades para evitar un pronunciamiento criminal? ¿Qué nos dice eso de su condición mental? Aquí nuevamente el récord habla por sí solo. ¿No han escuchado? Es el líder de Turquía. Bueno, eso nunca lo reportaron. Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley está a cargo de la seguridad. ¿Habló usted con Comey? No, no que yo recuerde. Hay idiomas que vienen a nuestro país que nadie habla. Nadie habla eso. Arabia Saudita y Rusia. Tengo muy buena memoria. ¿Recuerda usted a Marla Maples? ¿Sabe cuándo estuvo casado con ella? Se llama memoria y otras cosas. No recuerdo eso. Bueno, había poco respeto por Obama. ¿Recuerdan eso? Yo hablé con Putin muchas veces. Yo vi eso esta mañana, pero no lo recuerdo. Yo derroté a ISIS en 4 semanas. Ganamos una elección que decían que nadie podía ganar. Dicen, bueno, Trump, hiciste un buen trabajo, ya está. Ese es un individuo que es incapaz de evitar un procesamiento criminal. Un individuo incapaz de desempeñar un cargo público y que por lo menos debería pensar 2 veces antes de acusar a otros de tener una deficiencia cognitiva. Gracias por estar aquí, señor Hur. Gracias por destacar esta importante diferencia para el país. Estoy ansioso por escuchar su testimonio y cedo la palabra. Tiene la palabra el presidente de la Comisión de Verificación, el señor Comer. En agosto de 2022, el presidente Biden, en una entrevista de 60 Minutes, dijo cómo alguien podía ser tan irresponsable cuando le preguntaron sobre los documentos confidenciales que tenía en su poder el expresidente Trump. Pero cuando el presidente Biden dijo esto, él sabía que él tenía documentos confidenciales en lugares no resguardados. Lo había hecho durante años, desde la época en que fue vicepresidente y cuando fue senador. Los abogados de la Casa Blanca no han sido honestos con el país sobre la retención voluntaria de material confidencial y siguen escondiendo información del Congreso. Los abogados del presidente Biden dicen que ellos descubrieron este material el 2 de noviembre de 2022. Sin embargo, el presidente Biden mantuvo esto en secreto del pueblo estadounidense antes de las elecciones. CBS News dio a conocer la historia en noviembre de 2023, llevando al país a pensar si la Casa Blanca tenía la intención de dar a conocer que el presidente Biden retuvo documentos confidenciales durante años. Una de mis primeras acciones cuando asumí esta posición fue investigar el manejo de documentos confidenciales por parte del presidente Biden. Esto comenzó antes que se designara al fiscal Hur y lo que encontramos fue algo alarmante. Información obtenida de múltiples entrevistas realizadas por la comisión contradicen la versión de la Casa Blanca sobre el descubrimiento de documentos confidenciales en el centro Biden. De hecho, el cronograma comienza en la primavera de 2021, no en noviembre de 2022, como dice la Casa Blanca. Además, estos documentos no estaban en un lugar cerrado, como dice la Casa Blanca. También sabemos que 5 empleados de la Casa Blanca y empleados del Departamento de Defensa trabajaron en la organización, empaquetado y traslado de los documentos confidenciales. No hay explicación razonable de por qué tantos empleados de la Casa Blanca estaban retirando cajas que pensaban que solo contenían documentos parciales y materiales. ¿Por qué el presidente Biden retuvo estos documentos en lugares no protegidos durante años? Persisten múltiples interrogantes, pero ahora el presidente Biden está obstruyendo la investigación del Congreso. Hemos citado al ex consultor jurídico de la Casa Blanca para que le diera información a la comisión, pero la Casa Blanca quiere bloquear su testimonio. También citamos al Departamento de Justicia para pedir grabaciones de audio y transcripciones de entrevistas del presidente Biden con el fiscal Hur. Esto fue cuando el discurso sobre el Estado de la Nación. Esta mañana, hace solo 2 horas, el Departamento de Justicia finalmente proporcionó las transcripciones de esta entrevista del presidente Biden con el fiscal. Esto no es coincidencia. Aunque tenemos poco tiempo para revisar el material, por lo que hemos visto, es evidente que la Casa Blanca no quería que el reporte del fiscal Hur se diera a conocer. La Casa Blanca se ha negado a ser transparente con el país sobre el mal manejo de documentos confidenciales por parte del presidente. Y peor aún, parecen haber mentido sobre el cronograma, sobre quién manejó los documentos y el contenido de la entrevista del presidente Biden con el fiscal Hur. Por eso esta audiencia es importante. Lo que buscamos es transparencia y estamos ansiosos por escuchar el testimonio del fiscal. Cedo la palabra. Tiene la palabra el señor Raskin para su declaración. Gracias, presidente Jordan. Hay 3 puntos básicos que el país tiene que entender respecto a este reporte. Primero, el fiscal especial exonera al presidente Biden. La primera línea del reporte lo dice. Llegamos a la conclusión de que no se justifica la formulación de cargos criminales en este caso. Habríamos llegado a la misma conclusión aun cuando el Departamento de Justicia habría decidido no presentar cargos contra un presidente en ejercicio. El reporte también dice que el presidente Biden cooperó absolutamente con la investigación del fiscal. El Departamento de Justicia y los archivos nacionales fueron notificados de estos documentos y fueron entregados. El presidente permitió que el FBI inspeccionara su vivienda y se sentó por más de 5 horas para entrevistas voluntariamente, aún cuando estaba ocupado atendiendo al terrible ataque de Hamas en Israel. El reporte demuestra la devoción del presidente Biden al imperio de la ley y su respeto por un departamento de justicia independiente. El presidente Biden no invocó privilegio ejecutivo ni pidió inmunidad por estas faltas. Él no escondió cajas de documentos debajo de su cama o en una bañera. Él no combatió a los investigadores. Y ni una sola palabra en este reporte dice que él se resistiera a la inspección de múltiples lugares, incluyendo sus residencias, y él estaba cooperando, no obstruyendo. Tercero, el fiscal reiteradamente enfatiza que el presidente Biden se comportó de manera contrastante con el presidente Trump. Las alegaciones en el encauzamiento del señor Trump, dice, si se probaran, establecerían no solamente la disposición del señor Trump de actuar como lo hizo y factores agravantes. También se dice que, aunque se le dieron múltiples oportunidades de devolver los documentos confidenciales y evitar ser procesado, Trump, al parecer, hizo lo contrario. De acuerdo con el encauzamiento, no solamente se negó durante meses a devolver los documentos, sino que también obstruyó la justicia, contratando a otros para que destruyeran evidencia y mintieran al respecto. Fin de la cita. Él solo devolvió una parte de los documentos requeridos y deliberadamente retuvo los otros. A diferencia del presidente Biden, Trump no le avisó al Departamento de Justicia o a los archivos nacionales sobre los documentos, ni devolvió la totalidad del material confidencial en su poder. Él se negó a participar en una entrevista voluntaria con el fiscal y nunca accedió a que se inspeccionara su residencia. Por el contrario, él sugirió que se escondiera o destruyera la evidencia que estaba pidiendo el FBI y el jurado investigador. Él le pidió a sus colaboradores que llevaran estas cajas y las pusieran en otros lugares para escondérselas al FBI. Él trató de borrar videos de seguridad de Mar-a-Lago que eran incriminantes, y el FBI dice que él no entregó todos los documentos en su poder. Esto es tan contrastante. Para mí es difícil ver por qué mis colegas piensan que esta audiencia puede ayudarlos en su intento de hacerle un juicio político al presidente de los Estados Unidos. Tenemos un presidente que cree en el imperio de la ley y quiere protegerlo, y otro que hace todo lo contrario y solamente obedece a sus distintos tretas de corrupción. Las declaraciones iniciales se incorporarán al expediente. Presentamos al testigo, el honorable fiscal Hur, designado para investigar la retención de documentos confidenciales que estaban en el Centro Biden para la Diplomacia. Él sirvió como fiscal adjunto en el Departamento de Justicia y como fiscal para el Distrito de Maryland. Él sirvió bajo el juez William Rehnquist y el juez Kaczynski en la Corte de Apelaciones. Le damos la bienvenida y gracias por comparecer hoy. Vamos a tomarle juramento. Por favor, póngase de pie y levante su mano derecha. ¿Jura usted, so pena de perjurio, que el testimonio que va a brindar es correcto a su leal saber y entender, con ayuda de Dios? Que conste en el expediente que ha respondido afirmativamente. Puede tomar asiento. Su testimonio escrito será incorporado en el expediente en su totalidad. Le pedimos que haga un sumario. Señor Hur, puede comenzar con su declaración inicial. Gracias, señor presidente. Presidente Jordan, representante Raskin, miembros de la comisión. Tengo el privilegio de haber servido a mi país por la mayor parte de mi carrera, una década y media, mayormente en el Departamento de Justicia. He servido como fiscal, como supervisor, como secretario de Justicia adjunto y como fiscal especial. He desempeñado estas funciones con gratitud como hijo de inmigrantes. El primer miembro de mi familia ha nacido aquí. Mis padres crecieron en Corea, eran niños cuando la guerra de Corea. Mi padre recuerda que pasó hambre y que estaba agradecido por la comida que los soldados estadounidenses compartían con él y sus hermanos. Mi madre salió de Corea del Sur en los brazos de su madre. Mis padres se casaron y se vinieron a Estados Unidos buscando una vida mejor para ellos y sus hijos. Sus vidas y la mía habrían sido muy diferentes de no ser por este país. No importa cuál es la función o el gobierno, yo aplico las mismas normas y la misma imparcialidad. Mi respeto por el Departamento de Justicia y mi compromiso con este país es lo que me ha motivado a servir como fiscal especial cuando me lo pidió el secretario de Justicia. He hecho este trabajo como he hecho con todos los otros trabajos del Departamento de Justicia, de manera minuciosa, profesional, acatando las normas que rigen la labor de un fiscal especial. Mi equipo y yo realizamos una minuciosa investigación. Encontramos evidencia que el presidente voluntariamente retuvo material confidencial cuando terminó su vicepresidencia. Esto está incluido en grabaciones grabadas donde el señor Biden le dice a su escritor que todos los documentos confidenciales estaban allá abajo, fin de la cita. Cuando él dijo esto, él era un ciudadano privado que estaba hablando con su escritor en su residencia en Virginia. También identificamos otras grabaciones en las que el señor Biden lee pasajes de información confidencial a su escritor. Sin embargo, no identificamos evidencia que llegara al punto de prueba más allá de la duda razonable. Como no se cumplía ese estándar, yo me rehusé a presentarle cargos al presidente Biden. Las regulaciones del departamento me requieren preparar un reporte confidencial explicándole al secretario mi decisión. Entendí que mi explicación tenía que incluir un análisis minucioso, así que tenía que demostrar cuál había sido mi trabajo, como espero que lo haga cualquier otro fiscal, explicando la razón de su decisión de procesar un caso o no. En este caso era especialmente importante. Me habían asignado a investigar la función del jefe del secretario de Justicia, el presidente de los Estados Unidos. Sabía que para que mi decisión fuera creíble, no solamente podía decir que no recomendaba cargos criminales y dejarlo ahí, tenía que explicar por qué. Mi reporte refleja mis esfuerzos de por qué yo me rehusé a formular cargos al presidente Biden. Esto es algo que se hace rutinariamente. Uno analiza las fortalezas y debilidades de cada caso y hay que tomar en cuenta lo que pudieran hacer los abogados de la defensa y habría que evitar que el gobierno no pudiera sustentar su caso más allá de toda duda razonable. Hay elementos en el reporte sobre la memoria del presidente, así que déjenme decirles algo. Mi tarea era determinar si el presidente había retenido voluntariamente material confidencial, a sabiendas y con la intención de hacer algo ilegal. Yo no podía hacer esa determinación sin sopesar la condición mental del presidente. Por eso tenía que considerar la presidencia y estado mental del presidente y cómo sería esto percibido por un jurado en un caso criminal. Este es el tipo de cosas que los fiscales analizan todos los días. Y como esto era importante para mi decisión final, tenía que mencionarlo en mi reporte para el secretario de Justicia. La evidencia y el presidente mismo ponen en entredicho su memoria. Dice, yo encontré el material confidencial allá abajo. Fin de la cita. Él no dijo que no recordaba haberle dicho eso a su escritor. También dice que no recordaba haber encontrado material confidencial en su residencia después que dejó la vicepresidencia y que no recordaba nada de cómo documentos sobre Afganistán llegaron a su garaje. Mi evaluación en el reporte sobre la relevancia de la memoria del presidente era algo necesario y justo. Yo escribí lo que refleja la evidencia y lo que pensaba que percibiría un jurado. Yo no lavé mi explicación ni traté al presidente de manera injusta. Le expliqué mi decisión al secretario de Justicia y la razón para ello. Eso es lo que yo tenía que hacer. Hice lo mismo cuando comparé la evidencia respecto al presidente Biden frente a las alegaciones contra el expresidente Trump. También allí yo expresé mi opinión de manera franca. Tenía que considerar precedente y explicar por qué diferentes hechos requieren salidas diferentes. Eso fue lo que hice en mi reporte. Tengo confianza en que lo que se señala en 3 capítulos de mi reporte son evidencia de lo que esto refleja y los insto a todos a que lo lean para que se formen una opinión clara del reporte. Rara vez los fiscales hacen reportes sobre sus investigaciones. Esta es una política de larga data del Departamento de Justicia para proteger intereses importantes. Nosotros preparamos este reporte para el secretario de Justicia de manera cuidadosa y esta es la fuente primaria de la información. Mis respuestas de hoy se limitan a aclarar información para la comisión. Voy a evitar hacer especulaciones o comentar sobre temas que se salen del alcance de la investigación, ni voy a hablar de las cosas que hicimos o dejamos de hacer fuera del reporte. Quiero darle mi agradecimiento a todos los abogados, analistas y profesionales que nos han ayudado a hacer nuestro trabajo de manera minuciosa e independiente. Es un privilegio haber trabajado con ellos. Debo hablar particularmente del fiscal adjunto Griswold, quien aportó y contribuyó sustancialmente con este reporte. Gracias. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Dakota del Norte por 5 minutos. Gracias, señor presidente. ¿Cómo puede ocurrir esto? ¿Cómo puede alguien ser tan irresponsable? Y Dios, bueno, ¿qué puede haber aquí que comprometa fuentes, métodos? Esto es totalmente irresponsable. Eso fue lo que dijo el presidente Biden sobre Donald Trump y los documentos confidenciales. Señor Hur, se encontraron documentos confidenciales en el centro Biden, correcto. Y en su estacionamiento, sí, en Wilmington, Delaware. Y también en la residencia. Y en su oficina y en una habitación aparte. Y en el Instituto Biden, correcto. Y para entrar en esto, los elementos del crimen aquí son muy simples. El presidente Biden tenía en su poder documentos para los que no estaba autorizado, ¿correcto? Sí. Y hay documentos relativos a la defensa nacional, ¿correcto? Y ya vamos a hablar de la parte voluntaria, pero él retuvo estos documentos y no los entregó a la oficina donde tenían que haber sido entregados. Como usted dice, estos son los elementos del crimen, incluyendo la intencionalidad. Y hay por lo menos dos citas donde él le dice a su escritor, y está en su reporte, esto es del 16 de febrero de 2017, él dice, encontramos documentos confidenciales allá abajo. Él lo dijo y esto está grabado. Y el 10 de abril de 2017, él da lectura a un pasaje de un documento confidencial. Eso está en el reporte, correcto. Y hablamos de documentos de seguridad nacional. Se ha mencionado Afganistán y demás, correcto. Y en cierto momento sus abogados personales y los del Departamento de Justicia hablan de las notas tomadas y hacen una comparación con el caso de... Disculpe, ¿puede repetir? Los abogados personales del presidente Biden hablan de las notas que no están cubiertas por la ley de récords presidenciales, pero últimamente usted dijo que no. Hicimos un análisis de las leyes aplicables y llegamos a la conclusión que la orden ejecutiva 13526 no se aplicaba en este caso. Tiene grabaciones de audio de su escritor donde el presidente reconoce que tiene información de naturaleza confidencial y la comparte con el escritor. Tenemos una grabación que tiene una declaración del señor Biden diciéndole a su escritor en febrero de 2017, yo encontré todos los documentos confidenciales allá abajo, fin de la cita. Y ustedes están citando pasajes de una reunión en la sala situacional del presidente. Y eso es lo que dice el presidente Biden. Así que el escritor no tiene autorización para tener acceso a documentos confidenciales. Eso es lo que entendemos que no tenía la confirmación de seguridad. El presidente entonces tenía documentos relativos a la defensa nacional, retuvo estos documentos voluntariamente y compartió su contenido con individuos no autorizados. Hay diferentes elementos de la ley. Una subsección se refiere a la retención voluntaria de documentos y otra se refiere a la revelación de estos documentos. Bueno, los documentos sabemos dónde estaban. En la Universidad de Delaware, en el garaje de Biden, en otras oficinas. Estamos hablando de una persona que tiene 50 años de carrera pública y no ha sido muy cuidadoso manejando documentos confidenciales. Nosotros nos referimos a cada grupo de documentos en el reporte. Creo que esto es importante porque pareciera, cuando uno lee el reporte, que él ha sido exonerado de todas estas cosas, pero pareciera, según el reporte, que él llena todas las condiciones de la falta. Así que hablemos de las normas del departamento. Esto no tiene nada que ver con los elementos subyacentes, ¿correcto? Se trata de si usted puede demostrar esto en un juicio. De acuerdo con el manual del Departamento de Justicia para los fiscales, un fiscal tiene que sopesar la evidencia y determinar si, en su opinión, se puede lograr una condena en un juicio. Así que, cumplidos o no los criterios de si hubo un delito, la segunda parte nos lleva a esto, la percepción de un viejo simpático con mala memoria. Usted puede hablar de un presidente en ejercicio, pero no lo hizo. Esto no tiene nada que ver con los elementos en sí del crimen. Se trata de lograr una condena. Correcto. Un elemento acá sobre si el juicio puede llevar a una condena. Se trata de sopesar si la evidencia ubicada llena los requerimientos de la evidencia para ser presentada en jurado. Pero el hecho de que se diga que es un viejo bien intencionado no tiene nada que ver con el crimen. Es la presentación al jurado. Ciertamente tiene algo que ver con la forma en que el jurado puede percibir e interpretar esto y derivar a conclusiones en un juicio. Tiene la palabra el señor Nadler. Gracias, señor presidente. En su testimonio, señor Hur, usted dice que encontró evidencia que el presidente puede haber retenido voluntariamente documentos confidenciales cuando terminó la vicepresidencia, ¿correcto? Correcto. Pero usted no concluye que puede demostrar esto en un tribunal, más allá de duda razonable. Esa fue mi opinión. Usted ha sido fiscal durante mucho tiempo. Eh, ¿Está usted de acuerdo en que una persona es encausada o no por un delito, correcto? ¿Puede repetir la pregunta? ¿Estaría de acuerdo en que no se puede hallar a una persona parcialmente culpable? ¿O es acusada o no? Correcto, esto es binario. Para estar claros entonces, mucha gente está sacando sus palabras de contexto. Su conclusión es que el presidente Biden no podía ser encausado porque aún después de su investigación no había encontrado evidencia suficiente para ello. Mi conclusión fue que en base a mi evaluación de la evidencia, ¿es esto correcto? No escuché su última pregunta, discúlpeme. En base a su conclusión final, usted deduce que el presidente Biden no podía ser encausado porque después de su minuciosa investigación no había encontrado suficiente evidencia para acusarlo, ¿sí o no? Mi conclusión fue que no se justificaban los cargos criminales. Tengo poco tiempo, así que cuando le digo correcto o no, por favor, responda. Hablemos de por qué, en contraste con el presidente Biden, el presidente Trump enfrenta 40 cargos por la retención de documentos confidenciales, aparte de los 51 casos que tiene en otros casos sobre incitación a la rebelión, mentir sobre sus finanzas y demás. ¿Considera usted que el presidente Biden reportó estos documentos al FBI tan pronto como supo de esto? Usted lo dice en su reporte, ¿correcto? Hubo una revelación voluntaria de parte del abogado del presidente de las autoridades sobre el descubrimiento de documentos confidenciales. Vamos a contratar esto con el caso del presidente Trump. ¿Sabe usted que el FBI solo supo que Trump tenía documentos confidenciales después que los archivos nacionales los descubrieron? No estoy familiarizado con los detalles del caso del expresidente Trump. Usted dice en su reporte que el presidente Biden no habría entregado estos documentos si los retuvo de manera ilegal durante años. Fin de la cita. En otras palabras, parte de entender la intención del presidente Biden es que él de manera rápida y voluntaria devolvió los documentos al gobierno, ¿correcto? Es un factor de nuestro análisis, sí, correcto. Por contraste, hasta donde usted sepa, ¿por qué el Departamento de Justicia pidió una orden de allanamiento en Mar-a-Lago? No estoy familiarizado con ese caso. Yo no participé en ese asunto. Bueno, se lo voy a decir, porque pensaban que Trump había mentido sobre la posesión de documentos y podía esconderlos o destruirlos. Se determinó que el presidente Biden obstruyó la investigación del Departamento de Justicia, pidiendo que sus abogados le dijeran a los abogados que él no tenía los documentos que se le estaban requiriendo. En algún momento de su investigación, ¿piensa usted que el presidente Biden le mintió? Yo digo en mi reporte una respuesta que dio el presidente a una pregunta que le formulamos que nos pareció que no era creíble. El reporte dice que él no mintió y que él no trató de mentir. Su reporte lo dice. Mentirle al FBI sería, en su opinión, obstrucción de justicia. Es un ejemplo, sí. Trump también obstruyó la investigación de Smith pidiéndole a uno de sus empleados que moviera cajas para esconderlas del FBI y del jurado investigador. ¿En algún momento en su investigación encontró usted que el presidente Biden le dio instrucciones a su personal que escondieran documentos de usted de otras personas? No llegamos a esa conclusión. ¿Piensa usted que este es un ejemplo de una obstrucción de una investigación? Sí, es un ejemplo. Donald Trump le dio instrucciones a su personal que borraran videos de seguridad para que el fiscal especial no pudiera ver cómo se movilizaron estos documentos. ¿Está de acuerdo en que la destrucción de estos videos es un intento de obstrucción de justicia? Yo no voy a caracterizar la evidencia en este caso, pero si esto ocurriera, estaría de acuerdo en que borrar el video es un intento de obstruir una investigación. Ese es el tipo de evidencia que consideraría un fiscal. En síntesis, a Donald Trump se le acusa de retener voluntariamente documentos confidenciales y de conspirar para esconderlos, y enfrenta cargos adicionales por mentirle a los investigadores. ¿No es así? Esas son alegaciones pendientes. contra el expresidente Trump. Y la razón por la que el presidente Biden no enfrenta cargos no es porque usted lo trató con guante de seda, sino porque después de revisar 7 millones de documentos y entrevistar a casi 150 testigos, incluyendo al presidente mismo, usted no podía demostrar que había cometido un delito. Cedo la palabra. Cede la palabra. Tiene la palabra al señor McClintock. Gracias. Para aclarar, señor Hur, ¿es apropiado que yo me lleve a casa documentos secretos o confidenciales, los ponga en mi garaje y se los muestre a mis amigos asociados? Yo no recomendaría, pero no voy a responder a preguntas hipotéticas. Pero bajo esta nueva doctrina, ¿sería apropiado? Yo no le recomendaría que lo hiciera, pero esencialmente es lo que usted dice en su reporte. Ciertamente sería algo exculpatorio si yo le dijera, mire, me estoy poniendo viejo y se me olvidan las cosas. Yo no estoy aquí para hablar de cuestiones hipotéticas, sino de los hechos. No es algo hipotético. Este es el punto de esta audiencia. Usted dice en su reporte, correctamente, que los expresidentes y otros funcionarios han tenido amplia latitud sobre la posesión de información confidencial y su decisión de no encausar a Biden por esto concuerda con ese precedente. Pero el problema es que esto cambia cuando se trata de procesar a Donald Trump y la ironía es que como presidente Trump tenía plena discreción sobre el manejo de documentos confidenciales y total discrecionalidad para decidir qué podía retener. Como senador o vicepresidente no era el mismo caso con Joe Biden. Estamos hablando de un doble estándar. Creo que sería tóxico para el imperio de la ley si estos fueran dos ciudadanos comunes, pero el hecho de que la única persona procesada en este caso es el adversario político del presidente convierte esto en un asalto contra nuestra democracia. Esto lo podemos esperar de una república bananera. ¿Cómo se puede interpretar esto? Yo me referí al precedente en el tema del encausamiento del expresidente Trump. Yo comparé ambos precedentes en mi reporte y no estoy aquí para comentar más allá de eso. Usted dice, por ejemplo, que no había evidencia que llegara más allá de la duda razonable. Pero aquí había documentos confidenciales en múltiples lugares durante años. Él le dijo a otros que lo sabía y compartió este material con otros. Entonces uno se pregunta, ¿cuál es la interpretación de la frase duda razonable? Como digo extensamente en mi explicación en los capítulos 11 y 12 del reporte, mi evaluación es que la evidencia, si fuera presentada en un juicio frente a potenciales argumentos de la defensa, probablemente no llevaría a una condena. Ese es uno de los puntos que usted menciona, la probabilidad de que se condene al presidente Biden si es percibido como un anciano con mala memoria. Pero ¿no es esto algo que debe decidir un juez o un jurado? Y nuevamente, el punto es este. A Donald Trump lo están procesando por exactamente lo mismo que usted dice que hizo Joe Biden. Legislador, si le he entendido correctamente su pregunta, usted me dice, ¿no es esta una pregunta para el jurado? Mi pregunta es la siguiente. ¿Puede esto incidir en la inocencia o culpabilidad de un individuo? Esto incide en la percepción del jurado. Entonces, mi respuesta a lo que digo es correcto. Lo siento, señor Hurt, yo soy un anciano y se me olvidan las cosas. Esa es la doctrina que usted está estableciendo y esto es aterrador. Mi intención no es establecer una doctrina. Yo tenía una tarea particular que cumplir con una evidencia particular y hacer una determinación en base a la misma. El punto crucial aquí es lo siguiente. La base de nuestro sistema de justicia es igualdad de justicia para todos frente a la ley. Esa es la base de su legitimidad. Sin esto, la ley pierde autoridad moral. La justicia es representada como ciega por esto. No importa quién es llevado ante la justicia, todos son tratados por igual. Pero si no es así, el imperio de la ley se convierte en un arma contra rivales políticos y un instrumento para el despotismo. Esta decisión del Departamento de Justicia está cruzando una línea muy clara. Cedo la palabra. Quisiera pedir que se incorpore el discurso sobre el Estado de la Nación sin objeción. Señor presidente, pido que se incluya un artículo publicado hoy por el Washington Post titulado Transcripción de la entrevista al presidente Biden revela detalles. Él no aparece allí como alguien olvidadizo, como se lo describe. Tiene la palabra la dama de California. Gracias, señor presidente, y gracias, señor Hur, por estar hoy aquí. Pienso que su reporte es muy interesante y he visto aquí múltiples cosas sobre la ley, precedentes. Hay claras diferencias acá, en este caso, establecidos por los presidentes Reagan, Trump y Biden. Es sabido que el presidente Reagan retuvo diarios de su presidencia que incluían información confidencial. Lo que yo no sabía, y lo supe por su reporte, es que el Departamento de Justicia repetidamente describió estos diarios en procesos legales como los récords personales del señor Reagan y que nunca se trató de quitarle sus diarios. Esto está indicado y es muy interesante. Así que la investigación determina que el presidente Biden consideraba que sus diarios eran su propiedad personal, sus reflexiones, observaciones, su agenda, y que él podía llevarse esto a casa. Usted lo dice en la página 232. Mucho de esto tenía observaciones relativas a trabajo. También tenía cuestiones personales, como por ejemplo, cito, observaciones sobre la enfermedad y la muerte de su hijo Bo. Eso se indica en su reporte. Es obvio, pues, en base al precedente de Reagan, que no se justificaba la formulación de cargos criminales en este asunto. Quiero ser muy clara. Si bien aquí hay información muy personal en los diarios del presidente Biden y que el presidente Biden lo considera su propiedad personal, el presidente le permitió a su equipo que revisara todos los cuadernos que se encontraron. ¿Correcto? Correcto. Eso contrasta con el caso del expresidente Trump. Él obstruyó todas las investigaciones. Usted también entrevistó al presidente Biden sobre otros documentos confidenciales que encontraron aparte de sus diarios, ¿correcto? Así es. El presidente le dijo que él pensaba que cualquier documento, aparte de los escritos de su puño y letra, era propiedad personal. No escuchamos eso del presidente. Así que hay una diferencia con el caso del expresidente Trump. El expresidente Trump dice que todos los documentos marcados como confidenciales eran su propiedad personal. El presidente Biden no consideraba que estos documentos generados por otras entidades e identificados como confidenciales como sus documentos personales. Si bien la mayoría está tratando de decir que aquí hay una disparidad con base política, vale la pena citar la página 11 del reporte, que dice, y cito, hay varias distinciones cruciales entre el caso del señor Trump y el caso del señor Biden. Lo más notable es que después que se le dieron múltiples oportunidades de devolver documentos confidenciales y de evitar ser procesado, el señor Trump habría hecho lo contrario. De acuerdo con el encauzamiento, no solamente se negó a devolver los documentos durante meses, sino que también obstruyó la justicia, buscando a otros para que destruyeran evidencia y mintieran al respecto. Página 11. Por contraste, el señor Biden entregó los documentos confidenciales a los archivos nacionales y al Departamento de Justicia. Él accedió a que se inspeccionaran múltiples lugares, incluyendo sus casas, se sentó en una entrevista voluntariamente y cooperó con la investigación. Es evidente que estos casos no son iguales. Y francamente me sorprendió saber que algunos de estos documentos eran diarios personales que muchos funcionarios han retenido después de su gestión porque son escritos de su puño y letra, son generados por ellos y en base a lo que dice el Departamento de Justicia, durante el gobierno de Reagan, es comprensible que una persona piense que sus diarios personales no tienen que ser entregados, como no lo hizo el presidente Reagan. Así que agradezco su reporte, le agradezco que esté aquí, señor Hur, y también quisiera añadir, señor presidente, pedir que se incluya en el expediente una carta del 11 de septiembre del abogado del presidente dirigida al fiscal Hur y una carta a Mary Garland, sin objeción. Y veo que se ha expirado mi tiempo, cedo la palabra. La presidencia reconoce al señor Hur. Señor Hur, ¿por qué lo hizo? ¿Por qué, en su opinión, Joe Biden se quedó con material confidencial? Él estaba al tanto de la ley. Lleva 50 años en funciones públicas. Estuvo en la Comisión de Relaciones Exteriores del Senado, 8 años como vicepresidente. Todos los días le informaban, ha estado en la sala situacional. De hecho, usted sabe que él conocía las reglas porque lo dice en la página 226. El presidente Biden estaba familiarizado con las medidas para salvaguardar documentos confidenciales. Y Joe Biden nos dijo que sabía cuáles eran las reglas. Dicen que Joe Biden estaba familiarizado con estas normas, porque él lo dijo cuando Jack Smith fue en pos del presidente Trump. Él dijo, ¿cómo puede ocurrir esto? ¿Cómo se puede comprometer fuentes y métodos? Es irresponsable. Así que él sabía las reglas, usted sabía que él sabía las reglas. Entonces, ¿por qué las quebrantó? La conclusión respecto a el por qué el presidente hizo lo que hizo no es algo que nosotros abordamos en el reporte. El reporte explica mi decisión, se le explica al secretario de Justicia que no se justifican cargos criminales. Creo que usted nos lo ha dicho. En la página 231 usted dice lo siguiente. El presidente Biden tenía fuertes motivos para ignorar los procedimientos adecuados para salvaguardar información confidencial que estaba en sus diarios. ¿Por qué? Porque, dice aquí, él decidió meses antes de dejar el cargo que iba a escribir un libro. Ese es su motivo. Él sabía las reglas que estaba quebrantando porque iba a escribir un libro y comenzó a reunirse con el escritor cuando todavía era vicepresidente. Ahí está el motivo. ¿Cuánto le pagaron al presidente Biden por su libro? No estoy seguro si esa información está en el reporte. Sí, aquí hay una cifra. Puede ser 8 millones. 8 millones de dólares. Joe Biden tenía 8 millones de razones para quebrantar las reglas. Él compartió la información confidencial con el tipo que le estaba escribiendo el libro. Él sabía cuáles eran las reglas, pero las quebrantó porque le habían pagado un adelanto de 8 millones de dólares. Pero no es solamente cuestión de dinero. En la página 231 dice que Joe Biden consideraba que sus diarios eran irreemplazables. Récords contemporáneos de los momentos más importantes de su gestión. Él lo dice por el libro que le iba a generar 8 millones de dólares. Dice que esto era muy importante para su récord como líder mundial. No, no era solamente el dinero, los 8 millones de dólares, también estaba su ego. Él hizo esto por orgullo y por dinero. Por eso quebrantó las reglas. Son los motivos más viejos. Eso aparece en el reporte y encontramos evidencia en ese sentido. Hay otra declaración importante en el reporte. Usted dice que Joe Biden se veía a sí mismo como un individuo con madera de presidente. Creo que sí, que eso está en el reporte, al menos en el sumario. Creo que esto es importante porque esta es la parte que asusta. En la página 200, Joe Biden, y esta es una cita, Joe Biden arriesgó la seguridad nacional cuando compartió información con su escritor, con el tipo que lo estaba ayudando a conseguir $8 millones. Y ¿sabe qué, señor Hur? Lo que hizo ¿qué hizo este individuo con la información que le compartió el presidente Biden? ¿Qué hizo él cuando usted lo nombraron fiscal especial? Si se refiere a las grabaciones de audio, a eso me refiero. Él trató de deshacerse de los documentos, trató de destruir evidencia, correcto. El mismo que estaba ayudando a Joe Biden a conseguir $8 millones, el motivo que tenía Joe Biden para retener esta información confidencial, y él sabía que esto era ilegal. ¿Y qué hizo este individuo? Destruyó la evidencia. Eso es clave, en mi opinión. Cedo la palabra. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Maryland por 5 minutos. Señor Hur, su reporte se dice, llegamos a la conclusión de que no se justifican cargos criminales en este asunto. ¿Hay alguna razón para que usted cambie de opinión? No. Usted destaca el respaldo que recibió del secretario de Justicia y el Departamento de Justicia. ¿Ha cambiado de opinión? No. El reporte habla de la cooperación del presidente Biden. Él permitió que se inspeccionaran sus casas. Él está en medio de una crisis mundial. ¿Alguna razón para cambiar de parecer? Usted también contrasta la cooperación de Biden con el comportamiento de Donald Trump. Dice que cuando se le dieron múltiples oportunidades de devolver los documentos, el señor Trump supuestamente hizo lo contrario. De acuerdo al encauzamiento, no solo se negó a devolver los documentos, sino que también obstruyó la justicia, buscando a otros para que destruyeran evidencia y mintieran al respecto. ¿Alguna razón para que usted cambie de opinión sobre esta diferencia entre la cooperación del presidente Biden y la falta de cooperación del expresidente? No. Con este contraste, mis colegas han pasado de ser investigadores de un potencial juicio político a ser especialistas aficionados sobre el tema de la memoria en base a este diagnóstico pasajero del presidente, quien tiene unas habilidades que hasta los más notables ninjas del Freedom Caucus han ejercido en este caso. Así que estamos hablando de temas de distracción de los 91 cargos federales que enfrenta Donald Trump, sus casos en cortes civiles de Nueva York, que suman más de $500 millones, y su simpatía por dictadores, desde Víctor Orbán a Vladimir Putin, a el dictador comunista de Corea del Norte. ¿No es así? Amigos míos, esta es una prueba de memoria, pero no para el presidente Biden, sino para todo el país. Recordamos el fascismo, recordamos el nazismo, recordamos el comunismo y el totalitarismo. Es que hemos olvidado los sacrificios de nuestros padres y abuelos en generaciones previas. Cuando nosotros estábamos haciendo juegos de niños, en este caso, todas estas tonterías, Donald Trump estaba recibiendo a Víctor Orbán en Mar-a-Lago y después dijo que si llegamos a otra presidencia de Trump, Trump no le iba a dar un centavo a Ucrania. De eso se trata. Se trata de engañar a Estados Unidos, porque los tiranos y dictadores del mundo están avanzando. Entonces, ¿quién sale ganando con esta jugada? Putin, Orbán, los tiranos del mundo ganan. Una razón más para celebrar a Donald Trump y a sus seguidores, quienes han perdido el camino. Están buscando faltas graves y ahora se están convirtiendo en especialistas aficionados sobre memoria, y por eso le están cayendo encima al presidente de los Estados Unidos. El país enfrenta una disyuntiva entre la democracia y la tiranía. El presidente lo expresó en su discurso sobre el estado de la nación. ¿Estará el país al lado de la gente que se está enfrentando al fascismo? ¿Estaremos del lado de Ucrania contra Vladimir Putin, cuya guerra ha resultado en el secuestro de miles de niños ucranianos, la muerte de miles de civiles ucranianos y el ataque contra una democracia soberana? Pero hoy no estamos trabajando en eso. No estamos defendiendo la democracia, los derechos humanos en el mundo. No. Estamos tratando de jugar a detectives de memoria para hablar del lenguaje de un presidente que el mundo entero vio en el discurso sobre el estado de la nación, refiriéndose directamente a las grandes interrogantes de nuestros tiempos: la democracia versus las dictaduras. Y todos estos autócratas y cleptócratas del mundo se han unido contra la democracia estadounidense y tenemos que hacerles frente a estos juegos estúpidos. Cedo la palabra, señor presidente. Cede la palabra, caballero. Tiene la palabra el señor Commerce. Gracias, señor presidente. En una entrevista identificamos a múltiples empleados de la Casa Blanca que trabajaron en el manejo de estos documentos confidenciales. ¿Puede usted decirnos cuántos empleados de la Casa Blanca entrevistó usted? No tengo esa cifra a la mano. Por supuesto que fue parte de las múltiples entrevistas que hicimos en la investigación. Su reporte indica que una de estas personas es Dana Ramos. Sí, la entrevistamos. Ella es la exabogada del presidente Biden en la Casa Blanca, del presidente Obama. En cuanto a esto, en su reporte en la página 257 usted dice: en mayo de 2022, Dana Ramos trató de obtener los documentos que estaban en el Biden Center y decía que el propósito era reunir material para preparar para una potencial investigación del Congreso sobre las actividades de la familia Biden en el periodo de 2017-2019. Se me hace raro que Dana Ramos y los abogados de Joe Biden estuvieran buscando documentos sobre una potencial investigación del Congreso sobre actividades de la familia Biden, cuando Joe Biden decía que no había tenido nada que ver con los negocios de su familia. ¿Puede decirnos por qué Dana Ramos, una empleada del gobierno, estaba buscando estos documentos en el centro Biden? Señor presidente, yo puedo aclarar la información que está en el reporte sobre fuentes e información, pero no estoy en posición de ir más allá de eso. Cuando usted entrevistó al presidente Biden, le preguntó qué documentos tenía que podían estar relacionados con una potencial investigación del Congreso sobre actividades de su familia. Le hicimos al presidente Biden una serie de preguntas sobre los documentos confidenciales que se encontraron en la investigación. ¿Algo pertinente a la investigación del Congreso que usted recuerde? Si hay aspectos más específicos, me ayudaría. En lo que concierne a tráfico de influencia por parte de su familia. En el apéndice A hay una tabla que describe los documentos recuperados en nuestra investigación. Tratamos de entrevistar a la señora Ramos y esto sería muy relevante para nuestro futuro interrogatorio. ¿Puede hablarnos de esto? Era práctica normal grabar estas entrevistas. También hemos sabido que Amy Tomasini, empleado de la Casa Blanca, estaba en el centro Biden en 2021. ¿Entrevistaron ustedes a Tomasini? El reporte no refleja ese nombre específicamente, pero sí indica que entrevistamos al director de operaciones. Está en la página 973. En cuanto a Kathy Chung, ex asistente del presidente Biden, estuvo en el centro Biden en junio de 2022, cuando había sido contactada por los investigadores. Esto fue antes que se encontraran los documentos en noviembre de 2022. ¿Entrevistó a Kathy Chung? Creo que lo que usted me está preguntando está en la página 259 del reporte, y si bien el nombre no aparece en el reporte, hay referencias a entrevistas de un asistente ejecutivo. La comisión también sabe por las entrevistas con Kathy Chung que Dana Ramos, Anthony Berdahl y Ashley Williams, todos empleados de la Casa Blanca, visitaron el centro Biden en múltiples ocasiones antes del supuesto descubrimiento de los materiales confidenciales. ¿Entrevistó a estos individuos en la investigación? Entrevistamos a múltiples individuos y le puedo asegurar que teníamos la prioridad de investigar sobre estos documentos, quién tuvo acceso a los documentos y demás. Nuevamente, esto todo se grabó, así que debe haber grabaciones. Sí, era práctica nuestra. ¿Cuántos empleados de la Casa Blanca fueron al centro Biden antes que se descubrieran los documentos en noviembre de 2022? Según la Casa Blanca. No tengo una cifra exacta. ¿Cuántas visitas fueron hechas por empleados de la Casa Blanca antes que se descubrieran estos documentos en noviembre de 2022? No tengo la cifra en la mente, pero eso está detallado en el reporte. Tiene la palabra la dama de Texas. Si necesita hacer una pausa, déjenos saber. Tiene la palabra la señora Jackson Lee. Buenos días. Los republicanos están pidiendo múltiples transcripciones, pero el presidente Jordan no ha dado a conocer las transcripciones de nuestras entrevistas. Cuando estas deben ser dadas a conocer al pueblo estadounidense. Mi pregunta para ustedes: si usted decidió, en base a los hechos, no procesar o encausar al presidente de los Estados Unidos, Joseph Biden, ¿correcto? Esa fue mi decisión. Esta investigación fue independiente y minuciosa. Sí. Hemos escuchado de nuestros colegas republicanos alegaciones que el presidente Biden fue tratado con guantes de seda en esta investigación. Pero al leer el reporte, eso refuta este argumento. Aquí no hubo un sistema dual de justicia, sino falta de evidencia contra el presidente Biden. Señor Hur, su oficina y el FBI realizaron una minuciosa investigación sobre el manejo de información confidencial por parte del señor Biden. Correcto. En su investigación usted habla de 173 entrevistas de 147 testigos. Correcto. Y el presidente Biden fue uno de esos testigos. Correcto. Durante al menos 5 horas. Correcto. Y el presidente Biden accedió a la entrevista voluntariamente. Correcto. Y la entrevista duró más de 5 horas, ya lo dije, ¿no es así? Correcto. Y esto fue el día después de el cruento ataque en Israel, el 7 de octubre de 2023. Correcto. La entrevista cubrió 2 días, el 8 y el 9 de octubre. Pero el presidente estaba lidiando con una crisis internacional. Y después de la entrevista, él le dio respuestas escritas a otras preguntas, ¿correcto? Yo no recuerdo que el presidente hubiera estado entrando y saliendo durante nuestra entrevista. Permítame continuar. Él permitió que los investigadores inspeccionaran sus residencias. Él accedió a que se inspeccionaran las casas. Y ustedes recopilaron 7 millones de documentos. Correcto, correcto. Y esto incluye correos electrónicos, mensajes de texto, fotografías, videos y otros materiales de fuentes confidenciales y no confidenciales. Y ustedes hablan de las notas escritas del presidente Biden. Correcto. Y ustedes coordinaron con múltiples entidades gubernamentales para completar la investigación. Correcto. Consultamos a múltiples entidades en relación a evidencia obtenida durante la investigación. Y esto incluye entrevistas a expertos para analizar los documentos confidenciales obtenidos. En cuanto a los documentos, correcto, presentamos pasajes de los diarios del ex vicepresidente para su revisión. Y usted determinó que esto era confidencial para su investigación, correcto. Eso se dice en los apéndices A y B. El FBI pidió una revisión de todos estos documentos para documentos relacionados con múltiples entidades y se utilizó el más alto nivel de confidencialidad para estos documentos. Permítame continuar. El secretario Garland lo nombró usted fiscal especial sobre el tema de esto el 12 de enero de 2023. Él lo autorizó a investigar la posesión de documentos confidenciales por parte del presidente Biden, incluyendo la potencial retención indebida de estos documentos. En el centro Biden, en la residencia del señor Biden. Es correcto. Creo que eso refleja el lenguaje. Así que usted estaba operando como investigador independiente por casi un año y dice que tuvo todos los recursos para completar su trabajo, que realizó 173 entrevistas, incluyendo con el presidente Biden, revisó 7 millones de documentos, incluyendo los récords personales del presidente Biden. Y en esta prolongada investigación, usted no descubrió suficiente evidencia para encausar al presidente. Eso fue lo que determinó. Y si hubiera encontrado evidencia, ¿sentía usted en libertad por parte del secretario de Justicia para recomendarle esto al secretario de Justicia? Yo sabía de la oficina que prohíbe formular cargos federales contra un presidente en ejercicio, pero la investigación la conduje yo. Estas son mis palabras. Se le ha expirado su tiempo. Quisiera incorporar en el expediente este reporte. Tiene la palabra el caballero de la Florida. Pregunta al presidente: ¿por qué usted compartió información confidencial con su escritor, el presidente? Yo no compartí información. Les aseguro que no lo hice. Eso no es verdad, ¿no es así? Eso no se condice con las determinaciones en mi reporte. O es una mentira, como diría una persona común. Todo lo que había en mi casa estaba en archivadores cerrados o que podían cerrarse. Eso no se condice con las determinaciones de la investigación, lo que pudiéramos llamar otra mentira. Dice que entre los lugares donde encontraron documentos había una caja que estaba dañada. Entonces, su reporte indica que se cumplen los criterios para un delito federal, pero usted esgrime esta teoría de el viejito que colabora y esto lo lleva a la respuesta correcta. Si no se encausa a Biden, no se debe encausar a Trump, pero bajo esta teoría de el individuo senil que colabora, no contrasta esto con los elementos fundamentales del reporte. Debo discrepar con al menos uno de los puntos que usted menciona, o es que dice que todos los criterios se cumplieron. Uno de los elementos aquí es la intención, y lo que refleja el reporte es que en base a la evidencia no podía probar más allá de duda razonable a un jurado que esto se había cumplido. La razón por la que tiene esta duda es por el hecho de que Joe Biden es tan inepto para responder que no puede demostrar intención. No discrepo de esa conclusión, pero lo que sí es que a este individuo no se lo puede tratar como a Trump porque el asesor no le llega al piso de arriba. Así que él miente. Pero bueno, él miente porque es un anciano o porque es más sagaz de lo que pensamos. Así que quisiera hablar del centro Biden-Penn. ¿Le parece preocupante que el centro Biden-Penn haya sido inundado por gobiernos extranjeros? Queríamos llegar al fondo de todos los documentos confidenciales que se encontraron. Pero en cuanto a quién estaba costeando este centro, chinos y otros países, puede ser un factor de su análisis. Analizaron los miles de millones aportados a este centro. Hicimos una investigación minuciosa y queríamos llegar al fondo de todas las preguntas relevantes, pero analizaron el hecho de que los chinos estaban inundando este lugar, hasta donde pudimos encontrar evidencia relevante y significativa para la investigación. Lo pusimos en el reporte. Bueno, a mí me parece relevante. Otra cosa es el tema del escritor. Este escritor intencionalmente borra esta evidencia que pudiera demostrar culpabilidad. ¿Por qué no encausan al escritor de obstrucción de justicia y de borrar evidencia? El reporte tiene múltiples razones, pero en síntesis, cuando entrevistamos al escritor, lo que nos dijo fue que una de las cosas que tenía en su mente y estaba consciente es que yo era un fiscal especial que estaba haciendo una investigación. Entonces, para que todos lo sepan, él no borró el documento por casualidad, sino porque allí Biden admitía haber cometido un crimen. Él reconoce que usted estaba investigando el caso y borra evidencia y ustedes no lo encausan. Eso se señala en el reporte. ¿Qué tiene que hacer alguien para que lo acuse usted de obstrucción de justicia, aparte de borrar evidencia? ¿Cuál es el estándar? Como decimos en el documento pertinente del reporte, una de las cosas que él no borró fueron las transcripciones que había creado y que incluían la evidencia. O sea que si destruye una parte de la evidencia pero otra no, ¿eso lo absuelve de la destrucción de evidencia? Bueno, debiera haber tratado igual a Biden y a Trump y no fue así. Así que aquí hay un doble estándar y eso es preocupante para el país. Veo que mi tiempo se ha acabado. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Tennessee. Gracias, señor presidente. Estoy confundido por esto. El señor Ruskin habla de la imagen en general, pero de manera más restringida. El director Mueller hizo una investigación y él encontró evidencia suficiente para decir que había una relación entre Rusia y la campaña de Trump. Pero usted dice que no hay evidencia para un caso criminal. La historia aquí es muy simple. El presidente Biden identificó estos documentos en su casa y en otros lugares y le informó a los archivos nacionales. El Departamento de Justicia lo designó a usted como fiscal especial para investigar las circunstancias de este caso. Usted se rehusó a procesarlo porque no encontró evidencia suficiente para el caso. Es un caso perfecto. Usted hizo su trabajo, el señor Garland hizo su trabajo. A diferencia del señor Barr, no interfirió. ¿El señor Garland le pidió que cambiara su reporte? No. ¿Que eliminara pasajes? No. Como hizo el señor Barr con el reporte de Mueller, que lo hizo sustancialmente diferente de lo que era originalmente. Se ha permitido que un fiscal trabaje de manera independiente. Las acciones de Joe Biden al manejar información confidencial es similar a lo que han hecho otros presidentes y expresidentes, con la excepción de Donald Trump. Así que comencemos con preguntas de sí o no. ¿Recibió usted presión del secretario Garland sobre las determinaciones de su reporte? No. ¿Recibió los recursos necesarios para hacer su trabajo? Sí. ¿Tiene razón para pensar que lo trataron de manera diferente en cuanto a la independencia que tenían otros fiscales? No. En base a su experiencia como fiscal especial, ¿tiene razón para pensar que el secretario de Justicia lo estaba presionando o interfiriendo con su trabajo, el de Jack Smith? No tengo base para responder a eso. pero pensaríamos que habría que tratar a todos los fiscales de la misma manera. No tengo suficiente información sobre el caso de Jack Smith para hacer comentarios. Déjeme preguntarle esto. Si el presidente Biden en su testimonio sabía la fecha exacta en que asumió la vicepresidencia y el día que dejó la vicepresidencia, me imagino que la fecha sería el 20 de enero. Él sabía esas fechas. Y si él sabía esas fechas exactas, y sabía la fecha exacta en que murió Bob Biden, eso habría cambiado su decisión de no encausarlo. Yo no puedo discutir cuestiones hipotéticas. Yo solo puedo decidir sobre los hechos y circunstancias que tenía delante de mí. Pero me parece a mí, y creo que a mis colegas republicanos, estas pequeñas diferencias no fueron la base de su decisión de no proceder con el encausamiento, sino por el tema de que él cumplió voluntariamente y entregó los documentos. Esa fue la razón, no porque se le olvidaron algunas fechas. Mis razones están indicadas en el reporte y yo me remito al reporte. Creo que esto lo estoy cubriendo en lo que le digo. Pienso que no es un tema de la memoria, sino la diferencia en el caso y cómo manejarlo. La realidad es que el señor Biden se sentó durante 5 horas, habló con usted de manera admirable y lo hizo en el discurso sobre el Estado de la Nación, hablando del futuro del país, de la libertad y la democracia en el mundo, de hacerle frente a los rusos. Eso es lo que es importante. Vamos a la pregunta de los $64,000. El presidente tiene que tener valores, tiene que comprender cuáles son los valores de la nación para poder mantener el mundo seguro, lidiando con Ucrania, con gente difícil como Netanyahu. Eso es lo que hace Joe Biden. Entender el tema del seguro social y el Medicare y la importancia de estas instituciones para los ancianos. Yo rechazo esa clasificación de que alguien es senil. Eso es una falta de respeto. Muchos ancianos tienen problemas de memoria y no son seniles. Y tratar de decir esto es una falta de respeto. Joe Biden es un buen presidente, competente y que conoce los valores de Estados Unidos. Se le ha expirado el tiempo. Tiene la palabra el caballero de California. Quisiera comenzar agradeciéndole por su año de trabajo y por el reporte. Voy a tratar de no dar testimonio o producir conclusiones, pero sí quisiera preguntarle a usted. Una de esas preguntas es si hay notas con información confidencial de la época en que el presidente era senador. Había documentos confidenciales de la era en que el señor Biden era senador, cuando tenía 30, 40, 50 años. Correcto. ¿Y había documentos de la época en que fue vicepresidente? Sí. Se ha hablado mucho acerca de la senilidad o no, fallas de memoria o no, pero hablemos de algo que usted maneja como fiscal cada día. Usted comienza con una serie de evidencia inicial que sugiere que puede haberse cometido un delito. Por lo general, cuando un caso llega a usted, hay evidencias de que puede haber habido una falta. En general, sí. En algún punto de esta investigación, estos elementos incluían una actuación voluntaria y usted deriva una conclusión personal de si había una probable culpabilidad o no. ¿Es eso correcto? Esto es algo personal. Es algo que usted tiene que hacer como parte del caso, correcto. Esto es algo que como fiscal tenemos que ir descubriendo evidencia y la vamos incorporando. Antes, durante y al final, ¿llegó usted a a una conclusión sobre la condición mental de un anciano con mala memoria, que él deliberadamente retuvo documentos desde la época en que era senador? Estamos hablando de su apreciación personal. ¿Ve usted un patrón que se remonte a la época en que era senador de retener estos documentos? Yo interpreté mi función como fiscal en este caso de analizar la evidencia disponible. No estoy tratando de socavar sus conclusiones. Otros están discutiendo las conclusiones. Yo solamente quiero referirme a un elemento que me parece importante. Usted ha procesado a gente en el pasado y no ha conseguido una condena, correcto. Así que no tiene una foja de perfección, no lo diría. Eh, Usted ha hablado de una condena o un arreglo en corte. Creo que es apropiado porque yo tomo en serio las reglas establecidas por el Poder Judicial. Pero usted no procesaría a alguien que es inocente. En este caso, llegó usted a la conclusión de que este individuo es totalmente inocente. Eso no es lo que dice mi reporte. Así que usted no llegó a esa conclusión o habría estado en su reporte. Creo que mi función de explicar esto al secretario de Justicia es que, en base a mi opinión, ¿cuál habrá sido el posible resultado de un juicio? Quiero que esto quede claro porque me parece muy importante. Usted no llegó a la conclusión de que él no había cometido falta alguna, sino que el caso no procedería en corte. Correcto. Un par de detalles pequeños acá. Los documentos que el entonces vicepresidente retuvo incluían sus notas personales. Que usted sepa, ¿está esto amparado por la Ley de Libertad de Información? Honestamente no lo sé. Están amparados por la Ley de Récords Presidenciales. Todas las notas del presidente, el vicepresidente y los miembros del gabinete. Creo que puede haber opiniones diferentes en este sentido, pero no es verdad que él no dejó copias de estos documentos y que eso no se condice con un individuo abierto y transparente. No sé que hayan dejado copias de estos documentos. Quiero agradecerle y gracias, señor presidente. Cedo la palabra. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Georgia. Gracias, señor presidente. Señor Hur, usted ha tenido una carrera distinguida, se graduó en la Universidad de Stanford y usted sirvió cuando era un estudiante como editor ejecutivo del Stanford Law Review y trabajó con el juez Kaczynski en el noveno circuito y de allí pasó a trabajar con el magistrado William Rehnquist en la Corte Suprema, correcto. Y después entró al Departamento de Justicia bajo el presidente Bush, y trabajó con Christopher Wray. Yo trabajé para Christopher Wray por un tiempo. Y usted entró al Departamento de Justicia como secretario de Justicia adjunto, como mano derecha de Rod Rosenstein, ¿no es así? Yo fui su adjunto. Y después Donald Trump lo nombró a usted fiscal en el distrito de Maryland, ¿correcto? El presidente Trump me nominó para esa posición y fui confirmado en el Senado. Correcto. Y después el secretario Garland lo nombró a usted como fiscal especial del Departamento de Justicia para hacer una investigación de ciertos asuntos para determinar si Joseph Biden debía ser encausado por la retención de documentos confidenciales. Correcto. Y en ningún momento lo autorizaron a usted a emitir un reporte sobre si el presidente Biden estaba mentalmente capacitado para ser presidente. Eso no está en la orden. Y en su reporte, al final de la investigación, usted emite un reporte que es publicado por el secretario Garland. Él lo puso a disposición del Congreso. Y allí usted dice que luego de una investigación minuciosa, la evidencia era insuficiente para establecer que el presidente Biden había retenido voluntariamente información confidencial. Correcto. En base a la evidencia disponible, pensé que un juicio probablemente no llevaría a una condena. Y cada vez que se descubrían estos documentos en posesión del presidente, la Casa Blanca notificó a los archivos nacionales de forma inmediata. El equipo legal de Biden y la Casa Blanca cooperaron plenamente con los archivos nacionales durante la investigación. Una vez que se abrió la investigación, el presidente Biden y su abogado cooperaron con la investigación. ¿No es así? Identificamos alguna evidencia de retención de documentos, pero el punto es que el presidente cooperó plenamente con usted y nunca trataron de esconder documentos. ¿No es así? El reporte indica la cooperación de parte del presidente. Y finalmente, a diferencia del caso de Trump, el presidente Biden o sus abogados nunca certificaron falsamente que no había documentos confidenciales en poder del presidente. El reporte hace algunas comparaciones y contrastes entre el caso de Trump y el caso de Biden. Y a pesar de esto, usted usa su reporte para tratar de hacerle daño al presidente Biden por el hecho de que durante 5 horas de entrevista él de pronto no recordaba cómo había obtenido ciertos documentos. Y esto se suma a la narrativa de que el presidente no está apto para la presidencia porque está senil. Eso no es cierto, pero es lo que usted trató de ofrecer. Y por eso lo tienen hoy aquí, para ampliar en esa narrativa. Y usted sabía que esto iba a ocurrir, ¿no es así? Yo rechazo esa insinuación que usted hace. Eso no es así. Usted es miembro de la Sociedad Federalista. Esto es absolutamente injusto. No soy miembro de la Sociedad Federalista, pero usted es republicano. Estoy registrado como republicano. Y usted va a hacer todo lo posible para que el presidente Trump sea reelegido, para que usted pueda ser juez federal o tener otra posición en el Departamento de Justicia, ¿no es así? No tengo aspiraciones de esa índole, se lo aseguro. Y le puedo decir que la política partidista no tiene absolutamente nada que ver con mi trabajo. Ni tiene nada que ver con las investigaciones, ni en las decisiones que tomé. Ni tiene nada que ver con mi reporte. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Nueva Jersey. Gracias, señor presidente. Señor Hur, gracias por estar aquí. Para la gente que puede estarnos viendo, pueden estar confundidos y estoy tratando de organizar esto en mi mente también. La forma en que se presenta al presidente en su reporte es como un anciano bien intencionado y olvidadizo, alguien que está pensando en fusión de la historia, que retuvo estos documentos secretos que no tenían que haber estado en su residencia, y como alguien que quería demostrar que era digno de ser presidente y que su visión de Afganistán era incluso mejor que la del presidente Obama, y que lo más importante para él era la percepción que tendría la historia de él. Entiendo que usted está citando mi reporte, yo me remito al reporte. Usted está diciendo que él es un viejo bien intencionado y olvidadizo. Eso no recuerdo que esté en mi reporte, pero Puedo haber usado palabras en ese sentido de cómo sería percibido el señor Biden por un jurado. Puede decirse entonces que usted entrevistó al presidente Biden y que el presidente Biden estaba tratando de afianzar su posición como un potencial presidente. ¿Sí o no? Creo que sí. Está de acuerdo en que el presidente Biden quería demostrar su legado y que esto era un motivo para sus acciones sobre material confidencial. Es uno de los motivos indicados en el reporte. Podemos decir que en su reporte se dice que encontraron documentos confidenciales en cajas dañadas en su garaje, al lado de la cama de un perro y otros materiales. Eso está en el reporte. Entonces es correcto. ¿Estos son depósitos apropiados para información confidencial? No. Así que tienen a un expresidente quien ha dicho que intencionalmente retuvo documentos confidenciales para afianzar su estatura política y para presentarse como un individuo presidenciable. Usted ha indicado que estos documentos estaban en lugares no protegidos. Tenemos a un expresidente que no ha enfrentado consecuencias por sus acciones. Todo porque decimos, bueno, es un viejito olvidadizo con buenas intenciones. Bueno, si un anciano bien intencionado está manejando el auto y atropella a alguien, sería responsable por sus actos. Hay que aplicar la ley para todos. Así que la decisión de no procesar a Joe Biden, especialmente a la luz de esta decisión del fiscal Jack Smith de procesar al presidente Trump por una conducta similar, da la impresión de que aquí hay un doble estándar de justicia. Así que hay justicia para ustedes, pero no para mí. ¿Algún expresidente o exvicepresidente, aparte del presidente Trump, ha sido encausado por retener voluntariamente información confidencial después de dejar el cargo? No. Estaría de acuerdo en que la decisión del fiscal Smith de encausar a un expresidente por tener en su poder información confidencial es algo extraordinariamente inusual y algo sin precedentes. Yo no comentaría sobre eso. La respuesta es sí. Esto es la culminación para mí del doble estándar en el Departamento de Justicia y es un ejemplo de cómo el Departamento de Justicia se está usando como arma contra los conservadores. Sabemos que cuando se trata del escritor, es evidente que un mes después que Biden dejó la vicepresidencia, él sabía que había documentos confidenciales que estaban allá abajo, ¿no es así? Eso lo dice la grabación, sí. Lo dice la grabación. Entonces, a veces se queda dormido, a veces se le olvidan las cosas, a veces tiene fallas cognitivas, ¿no es verdad? Pero cuando se trata de su legado personal, de cómo quiere ser recordado, que se supiera que él era un tipo importante, él estaba dispuesto a quebrantar la ley. Y es lamentable que tengamos un departamento de justicia que trata a una persona de una manera y a otros de otra manera. Es un día triste para el país. Gracias, señor Hur, cedo la palabra. Tiene la palabra el caballero de California. Quisiera preguntar sobre algunas de las diferencias aquí entre el caso del presidente Biden y el presidente Trump, pero antes de eso, quisiera remitirme a la declaración inicial. Usted dice que usted no está vilipendiando al presidente, pero sí lo hace. Usted lo hace de manera que esto tuviera el máximo impacto político. Usted sabía que el reporte se iba a publicar. El secretario se había comprometido a publicar todo lo que se pudiera de mi reporte de acuerdo con los requerimientos legales. Y usted pudo haber comentado solamente sobre los comentarios del presidente sobre estos documentos, pero usted hace una declaración general sobre su memoria, ¿no es así? Yo pude haber escrito mi reporte, en teoría, sobre omitiendo estas referencias a la memoria, pero es un reporte incompleto. Usted pudo haber escrito el reporte con referencias específicas, pero optó por hacer una referencia peyorativa hacia el presidente. ¿No es así? Usted quería encender una tormenta política, ¿no es así? La política no tuvo nada que ver con mi investigación. No me va a decir usted que es tan ingenuo como para no pensar que esto iba a crear una tormenta política. Usted lo sabía cuando incluyó estas palabras, cuando fue más allá de evidencias específicas. Usted sabía cómo esto iba a ser manipulado por mis colegas republicanos y el presidente Trump. Lo sabía, ¿no es así? Yo sé cuáles son las regulaciones sobre mi comportamiento como fiscal. Escribí un reporte confidencial para el secretario de Justicia. Pero usted sabía que no iba a ser confidencial. Yo seguí las reglas. Sabía que no sería confidencial. Yo tengo por regulación que escribir un reporte confidencial para el secretario de Justicia. Usted sabía que se iba a dar a conocer. Era una decisión del secretario de Justicia. Usted sabía que esto se iba a publicar. Por lo que había dicho el secretario de Justicia, él iba a publicar todo lo que pudiera de mi reporte de acuerdo con los requerimientos legales. Y usted sabe que era importante no prejuiciar una investigación contra un individuo. Esas son normas que tiene el Departamento de Justicia para los fiscales. Y usted dice que siguió esas recomendaciones en el reporte. Tenía la obligación de hacer un reporte confidencial para el secretario de Justicia. Lo que usted escribió es algo totalmente prejuiciado. Usted dice que no fue algo político, pero usted tiene que haber sabido el impacto que tendrían sus palabras, el impacto de su decisión de ir más allá de un tema particular. Usted inyecta sus opiniones sobre el presidente sabiendo que esto iba a ser parte de lo que usarían sus adversarios políticos. Usted tenía que haber entendido esto, ¿no es así? Pero lo hizo de todas maneras. Lo hizo. Y veamos algunas diferencias aquí entre el comportamiento del presidente y el del señor Trump. En el encauzamiento, en la página 3, se dice que el señor Trump sugirió que sus abogados le mintieron al jurado investigador en la conminatoria. Usted no encontró nada de eso. No tengo el encauzamiento delante de mí, pero quiero referirme a su pregunta previa. Lo que usted está insinuando es que yo tenía que dar una versión diferente de mi reporte preparado para la diseminación pública. Eso no está establecido en las reglas. Yo tenía que preparar un reporte confidencial. Lo que está en las reglas es que usted no inyecta comentarios gratuitos para prejuiciar una investigación. No lo hacen añadiendo lenguaje que se puede usar en una campaña política. Usted no nació ayer y usted sabía exactamente qué estaba haciendo. Fue su decisión. No tenía que incluir ese lenguaje. Usted podía haber hablado de los documentos. Usted sabe esto muy bien. Es común cuando se le pregunta a un testigo sobre hechos de años atrás que digan, no me acuerdo. Usted sabe eso. Usted tomó una decisión política y la decisión incorrecta. Cedo la palabra. ¿Desea usted responder a esa última pregunta? Usted está insinuando que yo omití partes de mi razonamiento por razones políticas. No, no he dicho eso. Eso no ocurrió. Tiene la palabra el caballero de Arizona. Gracias, señor presidente. Gracias, señor Hur. Y creo que donde podemos tener desacuerdos puede ser cuestiones de opinión y no necesariamente sobre los hechos. Así que quisiera hablar de algunos elementos que me hacen pensar. Usted dice aquí que puede ser que un jurado no determine intencionalidad. Hablemos de eso por un momento. Si esto no es voluntario, pudiera hablarse de negligencia o descuido, pero eso no llega al punto de la comisión intencional de un acto ilegal. Son diferentes niveles de acuerdo con la ley, sí. Cuando el presidente Biden traspapela documentos confidenciales en 2010, o cuando estaba en una fiesta y se le traspapeló información de seguridad, eso no fue algo voluntario, no lo hizo adrede, negligencia accidental. Estamos asumiendo que la información se obtuvo, pero no sería algo voluntario. Hay ciertas categorías de documentos que cuando se analizan, saber cómo llegaron a donde llegaron, no identificamos evidencia de intencionalidad. Usted no diría que es ignorancia o incompetencia, sino que usted diría que esto fue algo intencional. Es una decisión, es la decisión consciente de actuar de determinada manera. Así es, congresista, y como digo en el reporte, el estándar puede reducirse a lo siguiente. Hay que saber que lo que se está haciendo es ilegal cuando se hace. Correcto. En febrero de 2017, ustedes están hablando, esto es en Virginia, en la casa de Virginia. Dicen, yo encontré la información confidencial allá abajo. Él sabe que tiene documentos confidenciales. 2 meses más tarde, en abril, entiendo que está en otro lugar. Creo que esto fue en Delaware. Y en la página 105 y 106 él dice, él lee notas referidas a diferentes puntos, habla de opiniones de la comunidad de inteligencia, del director de la CIA. Y cuando está leyendo esas notas, dice, no puedo leer mi propia letra. ¿Qué es lo que dice aquí? Y el escritor dice, bueno, algo en tal o cual sentido. Y Biden dice, cuidado porque algo de esto puede ser confidencial. Cuidado. Mi respuesta inmediata es, bueno, él sabe que tiene documentos confidenciales, él está leyendo notas que no puede leer, le da a alguien que no tiene verificación de seguridad y le dice, lee esto, pero cuidado porque puede ser confidencial. Y él le dice, está bien. Y dice, bueno, no sé si es confidencial o no. Y aquí es donde tenemos una diferencia de opinión. Cuando usted dice algo como, hey, mira, esto puede ser confidencial, cuidado. Esa advertencia de que algo puede ser confidencial no indica culpabilidad. Eso indica que él puede saber algo más allá. Y él lee información confidencial, que sigue siendo confidencial hoy en día. Eso está en la página 106. Así que cuando vemos esto, es difícil decir, bueno, fue ignorancia, incompetencia, fue un accidente. Él sabía lo que estaba haciendo. Él le dice a este individuo que va a dar a conocer este material confidencial, pero le dice, ten cuidado, cuidado, puede ser confidencial. Eso indica algo más que la mera percepción, porque lo que debió haber dicho después es, no sé si esto es confidencial o no, pero vamos a obviar esto por ahora hasta que esto quede claro, pero no lo hace. Lo que él dice es, léelo de todos modos. Cedo la palabra.
Mr. Hur, I was moved by your parents' immigrant story and how that has shaped you And their story is a story that so many of us know through our constituents. It's the story of America. It's a story that the guy who appointed you would end if he was in charge again. It's a story that most of the folks on the other side of the aisle seek to block every day in this room, but it's a story that's persuasive. You want your report to be received with credibility, is that right?
My goal was to provide a thorough explanation of my decision to the Attorney General as I was required to do. And as I said in my opening statement, I felt that I needed to show my work.
And you want to be received as credible, right?
That would be helpful and laudable, yes.
Well, a lot has changed since 2018 for the person who appointed you, former President Trump. Since you were appointed, he was impeached for leveraging 350 million U.S. taxpayer dollars over Ukraine to get dirt on President Biden. He was then impeached a second time for inciting an insurrection. He was charged for possessing classified documents and obstructing justice. He was charged for paying for the silence of a porn star. He was charged in Georgia for his role in January 6th. He was charged in the District of Columbia for his role in January 6th. He owes $400 million to the state of New York for defrauding the state through his taxes, and he has been judged a rapist. You want to be perceived, understandably, as credible, and so I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like an easy
about
answer.
what will happen in the future.
Considering what I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it. And
but you don't want to be associated with that guy again, do you?
Congressman, I'm not here to offer any opinions about what may or may not happen in the future. I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report, which I stand by.
There were no limits on you as to what you could charge President Biden by the Attorney General, is that right?
The decisions that I made that are reflected in the report are my own.
And you did not bring any charges, is that correct?
Correct.
There were no limits on John Durham and his investigation of the prior administration when he was special counsel, is that right?
I don't believe I have the information required to answer the question about the Durham investigation.
Well, he sat in the same chair that you're sitting in. He told us that he also investigated President Biden and President Obama and did not bring any charges. President Biden sat for an interview with you over 2 days for approximately 10 hours, is that right?
A little over 5 hours, Congressman.
Over 2 days?
Correct.
You know, that's in sharp contrast to a guy who did not sit for an interview when the Mueller investigation took place. That was Donald Trump. Did not sit for an interview when he was impeached in this committee room by the Judiciary Committee. Did not sit for an interview when the second impeachment occurred and he was invited to sit for an interview for his role in January 6th. And did not sit for an interview in the January 6th case or the classified documents case. Chairman also has not sat for an interview in his own subpoena, but Joe Biden has. I now want to turn you to the transcript and day 1, page 47. You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Those words do appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Photographic is what you said. Is that right?
That word does appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
I now want to show you and play a video of what is absolutely not photographic.
In the failing New York Times by an anonymous, really an anonymous, gutless coward.
We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.
I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation.
And I watch our police and our firemen down in 7-Eleven, down at the World Trade Center.
And we did with Obama. We won an election that everyone said couldn't be won.
This is the very definition of totalitarianism.
And let me begin by wishing you a beautiful, look, you remember this? Do you remember?
God bless the United States. The windmills are driving them crazy. They're driving
Time of the
the whales, I think, a little batty.
Time
And I
of the
went to
gentleman
Puerto
has
Rico,
expired.
and I met with the president of the
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, I'm way down here at the end of the dais. I think today the Justice Department released the transcripts of the interviews with President Biden. Are you aware of that?
I understand that to be true, yes.
Did you have any involvement in the decision or the timing of the release of the transcripts?
No, Congressman.
Did you make any recommendation about the release of the transcripts or being done or not?
I did not. That was above my pay grade.
Yeah, I don't know why they've been released so close to this hearing, but it sort of, it impacts our ability to evaluate your report and ask you questions about it. So, but there's one point, just as an illustration, on 221 of your report, you're describing, I think, it's the Afghan pack or something like that, about in 2009, I think, is the information came from. And you say, as one reason not to prosecute, Mr. Biden says, in addition, Mr. Biden told us in his interview that he does not recognize the marking confidential as a classification marking. To him, the marking means the document should be held in confidence, but not necessarily that it is classified. And footnote 866 is a reference, and it refers to the Biden 10-9-23 transcript at 24 and 25. Now, we have that now, but we haven't until this morning. But I just want to read from that exchange. This is on page 24 at line 15. Mr. Crickbaum. So this is a typewritten document. It's got a confidential, what appears to be a stamp at the top. And the top of the document indicates it's from the American AM Embassy, Kabul. It's dated what appears to me to be November '09. The only question I have for you about this, Mr. President, is the confidential marking. Do you recognize that to be a classification marking? President Biden, no. I mean, confidential doesn't want to get around. It's not in a category, I don't think, of code word, top secret, that kind of thing, but I don't even know where it came from. Mr. Crickbaum, are you familiar with confidential as a level of classified information? President Biden, well, if I got a document that said confidential, it would mean that no one else could see it but me, and you give it or the people working on this issue. Mr. Crickbaum, and are you aware that among certain categories of classified information, there is top secret, secret, and there's also a category of classified information called confidential. Is that something that you are aware of or not? President Biden, yes, I was aware of it. I don't ever remember when I got any document that was confidential that was meant for me to read and or discuss with the people who sent me the memo, so. And then it trails off. So as I read those answers, they're equivocal. He at first says he doesn't know. Do you recognize that to be a classification marking? He said no, and then goes on to explain. But then Mr. Crickbaum came back and he said, are you aware that among certain categories of classified information, there's also a category of classified information called confidential? And he says, yes, I was aware of it. So, Mr. Hur, just in that one instance, there seems to be a discrepancy between the conclusion in the report or the summary of the evidence in the report and what the transcript says. Can you offer any guidance to this committee why you would put that summary in your report as opposed to saying that he gave inconsistent answers, or in fact, why didn't you nail down in the transcript which was the right answer? He's given answers that says no, and then he says yes. Why didn't you pursue it until you knew?
Congressman, the report reflects our best efforts to summarize and characterize the evidence in the investigation, including the investigation we received from the president himself during our interview of him. But as you point out, the transcripts of the president's interview over 2 days are now available to the committee for their inspection, and the members are able to draw their own conclusions based on the transcripts that are now available to them.
Well, and I appreciate your answer. And I certainly think things, you can come up with some details that someone can disagree on, and it has the quality, I know, of some cherry picking because I've just found something, but we've only had a little bit of time to look. I don't think it serves this process well for the Justice Department to dump these transcripts into the public right now. If they were going to be released, they should have been released at a proper time. And I think I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yield? The gentleman yield?
I will yield to the chairman.
Just real quick, Mr. Hur, someone earlier said, said something about changing the facts. You said, I'm not going to change the facts, but let's keep the facts the same, but change the subject. If you had the same facts and the individual that you were investigating was 65 and had a good memory, do you reach the same conclusion?
Congressman, as I responded earlier to a question along these lines, I am not here to entertain hypotheticals about facts or circumstances that may be different. What I did was assess the evidence and the facts that I obtained in this investigation and make a judgment based on this set of evidence.
Fair enough. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. In your investigation, you reviewed more than 7 million documents and conducted 173 interviews of 147 witnesses, including President Biden. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
And your 15-month investigation cost several $1 million and resulted in a comprehensive 345-page report with several dozen pages of appendices. Is it correct that, as it says in the first sentence of your executive summary, that your investigation concluded with an assessment that, quote, no criminal charges are warranted in this matter?
Correct.
So this lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden. For every document you discussed in your report, you found insufficient evidence that the president violated any laws about possession or retention of classified materials. The primary law that you analyzed for potential prosecution was part of the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793E, which criminalizes willful retention or disclosure of national defense information. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of the word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word that
I'm going to continue with my questions. I'm going to continue with my questions. I know that the term
I ultimately reached relates to whether sufficient evidence existed such that the likely outcome
you exonerated
would be a conviction.
I know that the term willful retention has a Mr. Hur, it's my time. Thank you. I know that the term willful retention has a particular legal meaning, and I want to make sure that that meaning is absolutely clear to the American people before we go any further. As you wrote in your report, to prove as a matter of law that the president, quote, willfully retained any documents, you would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt 2 elements. First, that the president knowingly retained or disclosed national defense information, and second, that he knew that this conduct was unlawful. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And to be very,
and I'm sorry, Congressman, that it was national defense information. That's an important third element.
Okay, thank you. To be very, very clear, you did not find sufficient evidence to prove either of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt to show that Mr. Biden willfully retained any of the classified national defense materials that were recovered during your investigation, correct?
My conclusion was that the admissible evidence was not sufficient to make conviction at trial a probable outcome.
Not sufficient. Thank you. Let me ask you about a few specific examples so the American people are clear. One set of documents was discovered by investigators in the president's Delaware home. His staff had assembled those documents into binders in 2014 to prepare him for an event with Charlie Rose. Some of the documents in those binders were marked classified. You reviewed all of the facts surrounding the classified documents in those binders, and you determined, and this is a quote from your report, these facts do not support a conclusion that Mr. Biden willfully retained the marked classified documents in these binders, correct?
That language does appear in the report.
You also reviewed another set of classified documents from the president's home related to the Afghanistan troop surge in 2009, and you evaluated whether the president willfully retained such documents in his Delaware home or a home that he rented in Virginia in 2017. In your report, you said that there was, quote, a shortage of evidence, end quote, for any wrongdoing, and, quote, other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute, end quote. Are those quotes correct?
Congresswoman, if you have particular page sites for those quotations, I'd be happy to confirm their accuracy.
Page 6. It's right up on the screen.
With respect to the 2 quotes that are on the screen, in addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for documents we cannot refute, and we conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict, and we decline to recommend prosecution.
I was just going to get to that, and you concluded that, quote, the evidence is not sufficient to convict, and we decline to recommend prosecution, end quote. Those are your words in the report, correct?
Those words appear in the report.
Thank you. President Biden's counsel discovered a different set of documents at the Penn Biden Center and voluntarily turned them over to the FBI. Those documents contain national security information, but you determined that you could not, in fact, prove that President Biden willfully retained those documents because, quote, the evidence suggests that the marked classified documents found at the Penn Biden Center were sent and kept there by mistake. Therefore, we decline any criminal charges related to those documents, end quote, correct?
The language, we decline any criminal charges related to those documents, does appear at page 311 of the report.
Thank you. You also reached a similar conclusion regarding the documents found in President Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware. Quote, for these reasons, it is likely that the few classified documents found in Mr. Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware were there by mistake, correct?
That language does appear at page 325 of the report.
So it seems to me that the crux of the report, the main story, is that you found insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained any classified materials. That is the story of this report. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thank you, Special Counsel, for being here in these challenging times. And I want to tell you a few things that is interesting for me. You obviously could see that there is a motive, there is a legacy. You obviously see that there was a willful retention of these documents, but it's interesting for me that when you talk about sympathetic, well-meaning older man with poor, elderly man with a poor memory, it seems like every attorney would advise you to be sympathetic and be well-meaning, and it seems like the whole FBI needs to do based on my hearings here, I need to do check on amnesia because everyone says doesn't recall. So it seems to me that it might have been something way more in his recollection. There's a typical I don't recall, because that's what everything's like. That's I've learned it here. So is there something more than that? That just I don't recall something for you to actually decide? Because it seems that this is the core of the whole investigation. Why didn't you pursue further the charges?
Congresswoman, my judgment as to how a jury would likely perceive and receive and consider evidence relating to all the evidence that would be put in by both the government and the defense at trial, it was based on a number of different sources, from documents, including various recordings, some of them from the 2016-2017 timeframe, some from our interview with the president in October of 2023. I think what you're asking about specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year. And of course, I did take into account not just the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color in real time of how the president presented himself during his interview.
Well, hopefully he didn't outsmart you and all of us. But before I yield, I just wanted to actually just comment on something, Mr. Raskin mentioned about, us not remembering communists. I actually grew up under communists, and I have a very good recollection what it is. And unfortunately, Terrence on the rise, on the march, which he said, unfortunately, they've been emboldened by, President Obama, now by President Biden too. And unfortunately, our government and Department of Justice is really now resembles, a tyrannical government. It's sad for me to see that, but I'm going in with a really double standard what we have there. But I'm going to yield to Chairman Jordan the rest of my time.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Hur, during your one-year investigation, did you have communications with the White House and the White House counsel in particular?
Yes.
I think you had I got 5 letters that they and they communicated with you regarding your investigation. Is that accurate?
We received a number of letters from White House counsel's office and as well as the president's personal counsel. Right,
they're either special counsel or personal counsel. I see who signed the letters. And did the White House get the report before the report was made public?
We did provide a draft of the report to the White House counsel's office and members of the president's personal counsel team for their review.
No, I understand. And did the White House then, once they got the report before it went public, did the White House try to weigh in with your investigation on elements of that report and frankly get the report changed?
They did request certain edits and changes to the draft report.
Yeah, I see that in the February 5th letter. Did they only correspond with you?
I'm sorry, Congressman, are you asking if they corresponded with anyone else on my team?
Once you gave the report to the White House,
yes,
they saw changes. I have one letter here that's addressed to you on February 5th, and they said, we're pleased that after more of a year of investigating, you've determined, they respond to the report. And then they disagree with your, they asked for you to change some of the things you had in your report, namely the fact that the president's memory was not very good. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but I also have two other letters. One on February 7th to Merrick Garland, where they raised the same concern, and then on February 12th, where they go to the DAG. Bradley Weinsheimer. You familiar with those?
I am familiar with those letters. Bradley Weinsheimer is an assistant or associate deputy attorney general.
Right, Associate DAG, the ADAG, right?
Yes.
And Merrick Garland, of course, is the attorney general. So
Yes,
you're
he
familiar
is.
with the fact that they went over your head?
They were certainly entitled to write whatever letters they wished to Mr. Weinsheimer and to the attorney general.
I just find that interesting. You know, the White House is, they're communicating with you throughout this one-year investigation, and then the White House says, "Oh, we're going to go to the principal's office, and we're going to talk about Mr. Hur's report." Do you find that interesting?
As I said, they were free to correspond with whomever in the federal government they wished to correspond with. I did engage in numerous communications with them during the course of the investigation, and as is reflected in the special counsel regulations, the Attorney General did provide oversight of my investigation.
Understand. I thank the gentlelady for yielding and yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. I want to first say that the House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to enforce the rule of law. Unfortunately, the actions of this chairman in ignoring a bipartisan congressional subpoena have damaged the ability of this committee to get information from witnesses and damage the rule of law. Now, Mr. Hur, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your compelling immigrant story that just goes to highlight how America is a nation of immigrants. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, yes and no questions. They are not trick questions. They're simply designed to highlight what you already found in your report, which is that there are, quote, material distinctions, end quote, between President Biden's case and Mr. Trump's case. So here's my first question. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to lie to the FBI?
We identified no such evidence.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to destroy classified documents?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to move boxes of documents to hide them from the FBI?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to delete security camera footage after the FBI asked for that footage?
No.
Did you find that President Biden showed a classified map related to an ongoing military operation to a campaign aide who did not have clearance?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
No.
Each of the activities I just laid out describe what Donald Trump did in his willful mishandling of classified information and his criminal efforts to deceive the FBI. In contrast, President Biden handed over documents without delay and complied fully with investigators. Mr. Hur, in your report, you write that, quote, according to the indictment, Trump not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it, end quote. You also say that if proven, these would be, quote, serious aggravating facts, end quote. Do you still stand by your analysis?
I do.
Okay. I have a few more questions as well. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden set up a shell company and covertly paid $130,000 in hush money to an adult porn star?
No.
Okay. Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to pay $150,000 in hush money to a former Playboy model?
No.
In your investigation, did you find that President Biden called the Georgia Secretary of State to demand that he, quote, find 11,780 votes?
No.
Did you find that President Biden devised a scheme to organize a slate of fake electors to undermine a free and fair election?
No.
Did you find that leading up to January 6, 2021, President Biden urged his supporters to travel to D.C. and to storm the Capitol?
No.
Thank you. Each of these activities I laid out describe what Donald Trump did, his efforts to bully election officials, overturn the results of the election, and deceive the American people. That is why Donald Trump has been indicted in not just one, not just two, not just three, but 4 criminal cases. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to go do a little repetition, Mr. Hur, in regards to the chairman's questions from a few minutes ago. So is it correct on that February 5th letter that was sent to you asking you to change references to the president's poor memory? Wasn't there a request by the White House to do that?
There was a request, yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, I think the record should show that the gentleman from Maryland earlier said that that was not the case. I think he said, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Hur's report. Obviously, Mr. Hur is telling us differently here. And didn't the White House then go to the Attorney General himself and say that he would like to see changes to the references in regards to the president's memory?
The White House counsel did send such a letter.
So if this president was 60 years old rather than 80 years old, would you prosecute him?
Congressman, as I've said before, I cannot engage in hypotheticals. I address the facts and the evidence as I found them in this matter.
There was an 80-year-old grandma that came to Washington, D.C. a few years ago, did not commit a violent crime, committed a crime, but did not commit a violent crime, and she was fully prosecuted. Doesn't that seem like it's a dual system of justice where the president is above the law?
Congressman, I don't know the facts and the details of this other case that you're referencing with this other person.
You say that the president is unlikely to reoffend in the future. I believe that was a quote that you put in the report. Is that correct?
I believe that's in Chapter 13.
How so? How is he unlikely to reoffend in the future? How do you come to that judgment?
As I say on page 254, any deterrent effect of prosecution would likely be slight. We are not concerned with specific deterrents, as we see little risk he will reoffend.
Well, isn't it because he's now the president and he has almost unlimited authority to release documents? Isn't that correct? I mean, as a vice president, he didn't have that authority. Now that he's president, isn't it easy to say that he's unlikely to reoffend because he's got almost unlimited authority to release these documents?
Well, that statement was based on that assessment of the likeliness of reoffending from this particular person, President Biden, is based on a number of factors, including the authority that he has now with respect to classified materials, as well as the experience that he's had going through a special counsel investigation.
Yeah, but look back at 2011. There were multiple instances where he was informed by his staff and they ratcheted it up to where there was a formal process. You're saying he's learned from that when he's proven that he hasn't? I mean, that goes all the way back to 2011.
Congressman, what I'm saying in the report at page 254 is that
he's a repeat offender, Mr. Hur, isn't he?
What I say...
Let me move on to, I'll move on to something else here. You said he had strong motivations to ignore the proper procedures for safeguarding classified information, and he provided raw material to his ghostwriter that would be of interest to prospective readers and buyers of his book. And I think you said something about he viewed himself as a historic figure, correct?
I believe those words do all appear in the report.
Yeah, and he was also doing this for business purposes, that there may be people that would want to buy his book.
Towards the end of his vice presidency, Mr. Biden had resolved to write a book and began work on it towards the end of his vice presidency.
You know, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really consistent with the Biden family when you look at them in trying to enrich themselves. I mean, you're familiar with the work that the Oversight Committee has done over the last year, right?
I have read some reports of it.
I mean, 20 phone calls that were made to his son that he denied in 2019, 20 shell companies that were created, over $20 million. I mean, doesn't it appear there's a pattern here that where I come from, they almost call it money grubbing?
Congressman, what I'm here to testify about today is the work that I conducted in this investigation and in this report.
So I want to thank you for the work that you did as far as you could, but unfortunately, you are part of the Praetorian Guard that guards the swamp out here in Washington, D.C., protecting the elites. And Joe Biden is part of that company of the elites. And you see it in the things that the Department of Justice has not acted on, Mr. Chairman. I mean, you look at the president's son, who does not have to answer for lying on his Form 4473 in regards to throwing away a weapon. You see it where the Department of Justice fends off the IRS when the whistleblowers come with this information. And now we see it once again, where a president believes he is above the law, and there is no doubt that this president does believe he's above the law. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, welcome. I also concur, and let me echo what's already been said by my colleagues, that your personal story of being an immigrant, your family immigrants to this country, the way you've contributed to the greatness of this country shows why America is great. the great immigrant story. Thank you for being here, sir. First question to you is, you're a Republican?
I am, sir.
Does that stop you from a thorough and fair investigation?
I certainly hope not, and I know not.
This story is really proof of the old saying that the cover-up is worse than the crime. President Trump and President Biden handled their classified materials differently, wouldn't you say?
My report includes an assessment of the alleged facts in the pending indictment of former President Trump and a comparison to the facts that we found in this case.
But clearly the handling of these documents was night and day, correct?
Congressman, do you have a specific aspect of the handling of the documents that you have in mind?
Well, you know, President Trump intentionally took classified materials and obstructed justice to ensure that those materials wouldn't be taken from him, and he refused to work with law enforcement. Is that correct?
My report reflects no findings of obstructive conduct on the part of
Let me ask you another question. President Trump has been indicted in the U.S. District Court of Southern Florida on 40 counts related to his possession of classified documents. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact number of counts, but I know that an indictment is pending in that district.
Mr. Hur, you even wrote that after being given a number of chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, President Trump allegedly did oppose. And according to the indictment, he not only refused to return those documents over for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and lie about them. Compare and contrasting to President Trump turned classified documents over to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, and he consented to searching his home and other locations. Wouldn't you say that's night and day when it comes to cooperation with law enforcement?
Congressman, the report does include an analysis and a comparison of the facts that are alleged with respect to former President Trump, and does detail steps of cooperation that the president and his team took with respect to my investigation.
I would say, President Biden, you had his full cooperation in this investigation.
The report includes cooperative steps that the president took.
Would this be a factor in your decision to prosecute?
It was a factor, and I explained it as such in the report, Congressman.
And you stated that the recommendation not to prosecute had nothing to do with the Department of Justice policy not to indict the sitting president. Is that correct?
Well, the report says that even if it were not current Department of Justice policy that a sitting president may not be indicted on federal crimes, I would reach the same conclusion, that criminal charges are not warranted.
Mr. Hur, have you set new precedent here today?
To the extent that the Department of Justice makes enforcement decisions or non-enforcement decisions in particular cases, those are precedents, those are events that future prosecutors do look to in an endeavor to make sure that federal law is applied consistently over time.
Mr. Hur, I'd say, based on your education and your career experience, you're a very, very competent prosecutor, a very, very well-prepared attorney. I'm going to ask you one more time. Does the fact that you're a Republican, does that stop you from a thorough and fair investigation?
No, partisan politics had nothing to do with the work that I did or the report that I wrote or the decision that I reached.
Thank you very much for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Attorney Hur, Webster's dictionary defines senile as exhibiting a decline of cognitive ability, such as memory associated with old age. Mr. Hur, based on your report, did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report, Congressman.
You felt, though, that the president's memory or lack thereof was a critical reason to decline prosecution. The reason I'm asking this is whether you believe the president would be fit to stand trial, or do you think his lawyers would argue his incompetence to stand trial due to his state of mind? Also, you know, was he in a place to actually be questioned?
Congressman, my report, to the extent that it addresses the president's memory gaps that we identified and the evidence that we obtained during our investigation, they are addressed in the context of determining how the jury would perceive, receive, and consider evidence relating to whether or not the president had willful intent when it came to retaining or disclosing national defense information.
Very good. I'd like to focus my questioning on Chapter 14 of your report, the classified documents found at the Penn Biden Center. You state in your report that the documents found at the Penn Biden Center were the most highly classified, sensitive, and compartmentalized materials recovered during your investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Many of the documents came from Mr. Biden's West Wing office. That's also correct, isn't it?
I believe that is reflected in the report.
Did you ask if he had packed the boxes himself?
I believe that was one of the questions that we asked, and that is reflected in the transcript now available to the committee.
I think it's important. How would you characterize the packing of these boxes? Was it slow and meticulous, or were they packed in haste without much scrutiny at all?
I don't recall off the top of my head exactly how he characterized it, but I think the gist of the evidence is that the manner in which files were packed up and moved out at the end of the Obama administration was it was in something of a rushed manner.
Very good. According to your report, the boxes were moved between multiple offices, between Mr. Biden departing his West Wing office in January of 17 and his arrival at the Penn Biden Center's permanent offices in October of 17. Were any of these offices authorized to store classified information?
No.
When the boxes finally arrived at the Penn Biden Center's permanent offices, how were they stored?
I believe when the materials were recovered, some of them were stored in a storage closet, and I believe others of them were in file cabinet drawers.
So
but
what's your
I would refer you to the report.
What's your assessment on security and access control measures at the Penn Biden Center?
That was something that we looked at. There were some security access controls at the Penn Biden Center, but we did get a handle on people who had access to the office space during the time period when we believed the materials were there. And there were other people, including students and some foreign dignitaries, that visited that facility at the time.
Very good. You anticipated my next question. So when the boxes were discovered to have classified documents more than 5 years later, who discovered these boxes? It was Patrick Moore. Is that correct?
Correct. One of the president's personal counsel.
And did Mr. Moore have some type of active security clearance at the time?
No.
How about the executive assistant at the Penn Biden Center?
No.
On page 265 of your report.
I'm sorry, Congressman, I may have misspoken there. I am not certain whether or not that executive assistant had an active security clearance at the time.
Very good. On page 265 of your report, you stated, when interviewed by FBI agents, Moore believed the small closet was initially locked and that the Penn Biden Center staff member provided a key to unlock it, but his memory was fuzzy on that point. But an interview with Mr. Biden's executive assistant seemed to contradict his statement. Do you remember this exchange, and did in fact it contradict each other?
Sir, you're asking if I remember the exchange with Mr. Moore during our interview with him?
Right. Do you remember them contradicting each other?
I don't remember that contradiction specifically, but generally during the interview, sometimes we heard things from some witnesses that were in tension with what we heard from other witnesses, and we did our best to resolve those conflicts.
Just very quickly, in total, National Archives discovered 9 documents totaling 44 pages with classification markings. Is that correct?
From the Penn Biden Center, yes.
And you declined charges because in summarizing your analysis, you couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that retention of the documents was willful.
Correct, sir.
Very good. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Hur, for your testimony today. With all the posturing that we've heard thus far this morning, I think it's important that we refocus and remember the conclusion that you reached on the first page and in the very first sentence of your report, which was, we conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. Did I read that accurately?
You did, Congresswoman.
Okay. Your report also says, in addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for the documents we have not been able to refute. Did I read that correctly?
Congresswoman, if you would give me a page citation, I can.
Page 6.
6. Yes, I see that language on page 6.
Okay, thank you. Now, in addition to those conclusions, your report details several material distinctions, as you called them, between President Biden's actions and former President Trump's mishandling of classified materials. The facts are that President Biden cooperated with your investigation. Is that correct?
He did.
And his team notified authorities when they discovered classified documents, and he turned them over immediately. Is that correct?
Yes.
He consented to multiple searches of his home and other properties. Is that correct?
Correct.
And he voluntarily sat for an interview with you. Is that correct?
Correct.
But when it comes to Mr. Trump's treatment of classified materials, your report states that, according to the criminal indictment against him, he refused to return classified documents in his possession for many months, despite having multiple chances to do so, and he obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and lie about it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you noted in your testimony that the specific comments you made about President Biden's memory have gotten a lot of attention. And as we've seen today, our Republican colleagues are again and again trying to weaponize those comments in a cheap attempt to score political points. But as someone who's participated in trials, you know that witnesses, regardless of age, often have difficulty recalling specific statements or facts when asked about them many years after those facts. So let's take a quick look at a differing witness experiencing a lapse in memory during a deposition.
Your next wife was a woman by the name of Marla Maples.
Right.
And sitting here today, do you recall what years you were married to Ms. Maples?
I'd have to get the exact dates for you. I can do that.
Am I correct that you married your current wife in January 2005?
I don't know relative to that tape.
And what years were you the owner of the Plaza Hotel?
I don't know the years.
James Webb.
I don't remember the names. Don't remember the name.
So you don't remember saying you have one of the best memories?
I don't remember that. Okay. I remember you telling me, but I don't know that I said.
So I would also add that Mr. Trump told lawyers, I don't remember, 35 times in his deposition for a lawsuit over Trump University. And in response to questions from special counsel Robert Mueller, he answered, did not remember or could not recall 27 times. Now, Mr. Hur, you've said today that DOJ process and regulations required you to assess whether a jury would find Mr. Biden to be a credible witness, correct?
I'm not sure that I said those words exactly, but of course, in my view, how a jury would perceive Mr. Biden if he elected to testify in his own defense at a trial, that would be part of the whole ball of wax that jurors would consider in determining whether he had willful intent in retaining or disclosing national defense information.
Sure. Do you have any reason to believe that the special counsel who investigated and charged Mr. Trump with willful retention of classified documents would have failed to make an assessment of whether the jury would find Mr. Trump to be a credible witness?
I don't have any information relating to what, how, I'm not qualified basically to answer that question as to what went into Mr. Smith's decision-making.
But you are qualified to say what are the normal procedures followed by a special counsel, correct?
I'm familiar with the rules as set forth in the Justice Manual and my understanding of how to apply them.
And in fact, what you did?
Correct.
Okay. So I would suggest that we can all assume that the fact that Mr. Trump was charged with multiple counts of willfully concealing classified documents suggests that the special counsel in that case determined that Mr. Trump's denials are not credible. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an excerpt from the committee's transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antonio, former assistant director in charge of the FBI Washington field office on July 7th, 2023, in which he explained the urgency for the FBI to retrieve and secure classified documents from Donald Trump's estate because they contained national security information that should not be viewed by anyone without the proper security clearance. Even Mr. D'Antonio himself could not view the documents given their high security clearance, despite being the assistant director in charge of the FBI Washington field office. Thank you.
Without objection, General Lady yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was quite interested in the dates that are set forth in your report, Mr. Hur. And the reason I'm interested is because I keep getting confused between the 2017 date and the 2024 date as to the condition of the president's memory. And so was there a difference? Because when I look at it, it seems like his memory was bad in 2017, and then it was bad today. But there's never any distinction made. But isn't it true that if you were going to be looking at his at prosecuting as you were, you would look carefully at his condition in 2017. Isn't that the proper time? Because I think you say in your report that your best case, I think you call it out, the best case for charges would rely on Mr. Biden's possession of Afghanistan documents in his Virginia home in February 2017 when he was a private citizen and when he told his ghostwriter he just found classified material. That's the best case as you say it.
Yes.
And then you work your way through a series of defenses against your best case. So you were looking at his condition in 2017. And do I have that right?
You do, Congressman.
And his memory was bad then. We can draw our conclusions whether it improved over the next 6 years or not. But I just want to make sure it's clear that we're looking at his condition in 2017, which you then find as you go through the list of defenses, that is his memory is bad, his memory is bad, his memory is bad. There's about 6 or 7 defenses here. And so what it gets me to is this question. And I actually pulled this quote out of something I read this morning, that perhaps your report concluded, and perhaps it did not, that the president is, quote, incapable of being held accountable. But that's not quite what happened, is it? You didn't find that he was incapable of being held accountable, did you?
I did not. Those words do not appear in my report.
They do not. But you reached a conclusion that you didn't have the evidence, but then your report continually recites these defenses. And I'm having a hard time putting the two together. If you didn't have the evidence, why do you persist in reciting these defenses?
Congressman, I wrote my report as an explanation of my decision to decline charges as to President Biden. And the way that I came up with that explanation and wrote it in my report for the Attorney General is the following. The approach that I took was a prosecutor envisioning what would be the probable outcome of trial if we charged this case, if we presented the evidence to a jury, and not only the government presenting the evidence to a jury, but what would happen if the defense lawyers also got a chance to try to poke holes in the government's case at trial. And with respect to one of the several potential defenses that I lay out in the report, one of them does focus on the president's memory-related issues. That is a defense that the president's defense lawyers may well present at trial. And a jury is going to be confronted with at least 3 separate sets of evidence relating to the president's memory. One is from the recordings in 2016 and 2017 from the ghostwriter.
But if I may, forgive me for interrupting, but I'm limited on time as everybody else was. But you say, I think, that the evidence suggests he is incapable of forming, or you're incapable of proving, intent. There's kind of a bit of a difference there, right? He may well have had the intent, but you could not of holding these documents, and I hate to say hiding the documents, but you couldn't prove it. So what you did instead is fell back to the various defenses that might also be asserted against you. Kind of a heap of rationale for not pursuing the president. Is that, do I have it right now?
Congressman, I think we're on the same page. I think what I'm trying to convey is that the way that prosecutors assess the strengths and weaknesses of their case is to think through, hey, in the government's case in chief, here's the evidence we're gonna present, and the jury might be with us. But that's not the end of the trial. The trial also has to include presentation from the defense lawyers.
You're correct, and I'm a lawyer. I've tried cases, so I get it. Your report is not an exoneration so much as a determination that the evidence as you saw it would not overcome the defenses that you had identified, plus whatever lack of evidence you perceived. So it's not an exoneration, is it?
The word exoneration does not appear anywhere in my report, and that is not my conclusion.
The other thing that's of interest, and I think you were misquoted, you said something about, or someone, I think it was Mr. Raskin, suggested that you, well, I'm going to run out of time, but I appreciate the work you do as a prosecutor, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Hur, we've been at this close to 3 hours. We will, if you can hang with us, we'd like to keep going. There's a chance we could complete votes by the time we have to go to votes on the House floor, which would be about 1:40.
I can keep going, Chairman.
Okay, then we'll try to do that. There's a chance we may not too, but I just wanted you to know the lay of the land. Now yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hur, for your testimony and for your service as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I want to focus a bit more on the progress of the investigation and kind of some process questions. So you were appointed by Attorney General Garland as special counsel to investigate the president's handling of classified documents in January of 2023, correct?
Correct.
And Attorney General Garland, of course, as you know, was nominated by President Biden to serve in his role.
Correct.
During your 15-month investigation, did the Attorney General attempt to interfere with your investigation?
No.
Did he impede your investigation in any way?
No.
Did any other member of the Department of Justice or within the administration refuse to cooperate with your investigation?
No.
Were you ever denied access to materials, witnesses, resources from Attorney General Garland that you might have needed during the investigation?
No.
You submitted, I think this is right, your final report to Attorney General Garland on February 5th of 2024.
Correct.
Right, okay. And it was then released publicly 3 days later, on February 8th of 2024, is that right?
I believe that's true, yes.
In the final report that was released, were any of your substantive findings redacted or changed in any way?
No.
None of your findings were modified by the Attorney General?
No.
Did the Attorney General issue any kind of statement or a letter attempting to describe the contents of your report?
No.
Okay. You're familiar, I know, I'm sure, with the investigation that was conducted by Special Counsel Mueller years ago with respect to the former president.
Yes.
And at that time, Attorney General Barr was in charge of the Justice Department. He sat where you sat in this committee. I remember it well, just a few short years ago, testifying on the nature of that particular investigation. Are you familiar with the way in which he released that report and characterized it?
Yes.
Okay. Very different from the way that Attorney General Garland conducted this particular release. I take it you'd agree with that.
They were not the same approach.
Not the same approach, right? In the case of Attorney General Garland, no impeding or interfering with your investigation in any way whatsoever, releasing the report in full to the American public, not attempting to mischaracterize it or describe it in any way. Dissimilar from Attorney General Barr, who 5 years ago, as you recall, after Special Counsel Mueller submitted his report to the Department of Justice, took nearly a month to release the report to the American public, heavily redacted, and not before he had issued a letter of his own to the leaders of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, mischaracterizing the contents of that report. That distinction and difference is very important because from your testimony, at least from what I gleaned from your testimony, is that Attorney General Garland acted appropriately and ethically with respect to this investigation. I take it you agree.
Attorney General Garland did not interfere with my efforts, and I was able to conduct a fair, thorough, and independent investigation.
Very different approach, as you said, from the way in which the Department of Justice, unfortunately, tragically, functioned under the former president. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes. Would the gentleman yield for 10 seconds? Gentleman from...
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would just point out to the gentleman from Colorado's last point, there was one big difference. Bill Barr didn't name Bob Mueller as a special counsel. Bob Mueller was named by Rod Rosenstein. That's a huge difference in how this whole thing works. I now yield back to the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, in your report, you cited principles of federal prosecution and observed that, and I quote, historically, after leaving office, many former presidents and vice presidents have knowingly taken home sensitive materials related to national security for their administrations without being charged with crimes. And this historical record is important context for judging whether or why to charge a former vice president or former president, unquote. Why is examining this history so important?
Congressman, one of the reasons that it was important was because it would bear on how a jury would perceive, how a jury would decide whether or not criminal willful intent was formed by the person retaining or disclosing the national defense information at issue.
Has there been an exception to this in the history of the nation? Have we charged any former presidents?
As I state in the report, to my knowledge, there is only one exception, and that is former President Trump.
Given the history, is it fair to say it's preferable not to charge a former president or vice president for allegedly mishandling classified documents, in your opinion?
Congressman, I can't articulate a preference, whether it's preferable. All I can talk about is the work that I did, the facts that I found, and the decision that I reached in my case.
Mr. Hur, what's the difference in a U.S. Senator having documents and a former president of the United States?
For purposes of proving willfulness, I believe that there would be a number of differences in terms of the types of access and the ease with which presidents, while in office, can access classified information as compared to the access privileges that senators have.
Can presidents declassify documents that they have in their possession?
I believe under certain circumstances, yes.
Former presidents as well?
Congressman, I confess I'm not, this is not an area of the law that I've looked into or explained in my report, and I'm here to talk about the work that is reflected in the report.
Well, let me say this, sir. You have a reputation beyond reproach, and I just want you to know that. I think that President Biden ought to be thankful that the Attorney General appointed you to investigate his case. But you have a special counsel colleague by the name of Jack Smith who cannot lay claim to such a reputation. Isn't that right?
I have no opinion. I don't have anything to say about it.
In fact, Jack Smith, whom Biden Justice Attorney General Garland appointed to investigate President Trump, has a reputation, according to deep-rooted reporting from the Washington Times, as an overzealous prosecutor who relies ethically or on ethically dubious tactics, unquote. And his prosecutorial record is replete with a quote, let me say this, string of mistrials and overturned convictions. Actually, Chief Justice Roberts once rebuked Mr. Smith's prosecutorial theory as a boundless interpretation of federal bribery statute. That did not comport with the text of the statute or the precedent of this court, according to the Supreme Court Justice. And so, you know, my question is, do you think in the case of Jack Smith, do you think justice is blind when he's looking at President Trump? Since we've never done this in the history of the country, is justice truly blind?
Sir, I'm not here to express any opinions with respect to a pending case against another defendant. I'm here to talk about the work that I did with respect to the investigation relating to President Biden.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time back to you.
To this conclusion.
Congressman Jordan, I'm sorry, because the mic was turned on partway through your
Can you explain what specifically in your interview with President Biden led you to this conclusion?
The conclusion
that
about
broad statement that's been cited many times.
The totality of the time that I spent with the president during his voluntary interview was something that I certainly considered in framing my assessment and articulating it in the report. And that includes not only the words in the cold record of the transcript of the interview, but also the experience of being there in the room with him and, frankly, considering how he would present to a jury in a criminal trial if charges were brought.
But I guess I'm asking specifically. I know you cite in the report the dates that he couldn't remember when he was vice president, when he began, when his term ended. You cite that in the report. Is there anything else specifically that stands out from that interview with the president?
A number of things stand out, and again, I'm aware that the transcript has now been made available. I do provide certain examples in my report of significant, personally painful experiences about which the president was unable to recall certain information. I also took into account the president's overall demeanor in interacting with me during the 5+ hour voluntary interview. So it was a wealth of details about being there in the moment with the president, including his inability to recall certain things. And I'll also say, as reflected in the transcript, the fact that he was prompted on numerous occasions by the members of the White House counsel's office.
I read that. The brief look I had at the transcript this morning, because we just got it this morning, I saw some of that. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, or excuse me, Pennsylvania. I'm used to you being down there. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
I got an upgrade.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hur, for your service to our country, for your team's service in this investigation. You determined, after what you described as rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis, that President Biden should not be prosecuted for mishandling classified documents. In fact, everybody can take a look at your report. The very first sentence says as much. It says, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." Am I correct?
Yes.
That's the bottom line of this report. Am I correct?
That is the first sentence.
It's the first sentence and the bottom line. There's an awful lot of misinformation that has been put forward by the press in some cases and also by the other side of this dais. You didn't reach this decision because President Biden was sympathetic. Is that correct?
I reached the decision based on the totality of the reasons that I set forth at length in my report.
Based on the evidence. And while Mr. Trump, who is being prosecuted, is not sympathetic, you didn't calibrate any of that in there. Sympathetic, not sympathetic. Doesn't matter. It's the evidence, right?
Congresswoman, I did not reach any assessments of the evidence in the Trump matter. To the extent that I considered the allegations against former President Trump, it was for purposes of comparing relevant precedents.
That with your credibility, you were not out to get Mr. Trump nor here to help Mr. Biden. I think it's about the evidence, and I think you say that over and over again in your report. Why did you decide President Biden should not be prosecuted? Your report tells us, quote, "We conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict." Those are your words. Is that correct?
I believe if those exact words do not appear in the report, that is consistent with the gist of my conclusion.
Very good. They are your exact words. That was not the case with Donald Trump. You have a copy of your report today, don't you, in front of you?
I do.
Could you read a portion of it for me? Your words, it is page 11, starting on line 3, beginning with the words, "Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden." Would you read the next few sentences?
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Keep going.
According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
You may stop there. Thank you. You mentioned the indictment against Mr. Trump for mishandling sensitive classified national security information. That indictment says at the end of his presidency, Mr. Trump, I'm looking for my indictment here. I have it here. Hang on. Mr. Trump himself ordered that boxes containing classified materials go to Mar-a-Lago, where he hosted tens of thousands of guests. Then he kept these sensitive materials carelessly about the property, as you can see here. Classified documents ended up in a bathroom, a ballroom, on a floor, spewed about. And when a grand jury subpoenaed the documents, what did Donald Trump do? The indictment again shows against him what he responded by, suggesting that his attorney falsely represent that the FBI and grand jury that he did not have documents called for by the subpoena. He directed his employee, Waltine Nauta, to move boxes of the documents to conceal them from Mr. Trump's attorney, and then lied to his attorney and the FBI and the grand jury, suggesting his attorney might hide or destroy documents called for by the grand jury investigation. Mr. Hur, are those the type of aggravating facts to which you refer to in your report?
Congresswoman, the aggravating facts that I refer to in the report are set forth and described in my report at page 11.
Very good. Mr. Hur, to the best of your knowledge and investigation, did President Biden ever direct an employee to lie about, hide, or destroy classified information? Yes or no?
We did not identify such evidence.
Did he do so himself?
We did not identify such evidence.
And I want to give you a chance, since the transcript is out, to correct the record on an important point. Very sadly, your report on page 208 says that Mr. Biden couldn't come up with the date, the year of his son, Beau Biden's death, when in fact in the transcript it shows that you asked him the month. And do you know what he said, Mr. Hur? He said, "Oh God, May 30th. Would you like to correct the record? His memory was pretty firm on the month and the day.
Congresswoman, I don't believe that's correct with respect to the transcript, but if you could refer me to a specific page, I'd be happy to look.
I've read about it in reporting. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Hur, why did the White House ask you to remove parts of the report? What was the reason they gave for that?
I don't have the letter in front of me, Congressman. I believed that among their reasons was that they contested, or that they asserted that certain language in the report was inconsistent with DOJ policy.
The day that your report came out, the president gave a live news conference on national television. Did you watch that news conference?
I watched the press conference, yes.
What was your reaction to seeing the president personally attack you and your team?
Congressman, I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report and my declination decision and my explanation of it for the attorney.
And it wasn't just the president. Anthony Coley, former spokesman for Merrick Garland, has said that Democrats should focus their ire on her. The president's personal attorney, Bob Bauer, said that your report is a shabby piece of work and a shoddy work product. Do you agree with that characterization of your report?
I disagree vehemently with that characterization of my report.
I also disagree. I think it's very well written, well considered, and comprehensive. Do you think it's appropriate for the administration to be attacking the work of a special counsel that it appointed itself?
Congressman, I'm not going to comment on the propriety of the administration's reaction to my report. What I can tell you is that I stand by the report and the work that went into it.
Today, the ranking member started his opening statement by saying, Mr. Hur completely exonerated President Biden and called your report a total and complete exoneration. Mr. Hur, did you completely exonerate President Biden?
That is not what my report does.
Was your report a total and complete exoneration?
That is not what the report says.
So the statement by the ranking member was incorrect, yes?
As I said, the report is not an exoneration. That word does not appear in my report.
Based on the facts and anticipation of defenses presented in your report, could a reasonable juror have voted to convict?
As I said in the report, some reasonable jurors may have reached the inferences that the government would present in its case in chief at trial.
So a reasonable juror could have voted to convict based on the facts that you presented?
Correct.
If you were on the jury, would you have voted to convict?
I have not engaged in that thought exercise, Congressman, and so what I'd like to stick to is what's in the report, which is my assessment as a prosecutor.
Sure. And what you did find in the report is that the president, you said this is page 200, risks serious damage to America's national security through his handling and mishandling of classified materials. And you identify, quote, a strong motive for the way he handled those materials. Two of the motives you cited was his desire to run for president and his desire to sell books. So a reasonable inference for your report is that the president risked serious damage to America's national security in order to make money and advance his personal political ambitions. Is that correct?
The report includes a description of the evidence and different inferences that reasonable jurors could draw from the evidence.
And you also note that the president described his predecessor's handling of classified materials as totally irresponsible, and your report concludes that Mr. Biden's emphatic and unqualified conclusion that keeping marked classified documents unsecured in one's home is totally irresponsible applies equally to his own decision. Is that correct?
That language does appear in the report.
You cite as a mitigating factor the fact that the president cooperated in the investigation. But at the time that the investigation was happening and these acts of cooperation occurred, the Mar-a-Lago investigation was already a matter of public record, correct?
I believe that's correct.
So we already had a public debate about the handling of classified documents and the potential application of the criminal laws to that general set of circumstances.
I think that's fair.
And so the president, when he decided to cooperate or not cooperate, had to know that that decision to cooperate or not cooperate would become known to the public and he would be judged accordingly. Is that correct?
I'm not in a position to opine on what was or was not in the president's.
But it's relevant to your analysis as to whether or not it counts as a mitigating factor. If he knew that he was going to have to be judged based on whether he cooperated or not, that would lessen its value as a mitigating factor. So did that in your analysis lessen its value?
We undertook a comprehensive assessment.
So that specific factor, did it lessen its value as a mitigating factor?
That and all facts relating to the president's cooperation with our investigation.
Another factor you discussed is deterrence. And you say that deterrence actually, the factor actually counsels against bringing charges here, because you said, as for general deterrence, future presidents and vice presidents are already likely to be deterred by the multiple recent criminal investigations and one prosecution of current and former president and vice presidents for mishandling classified documents. So that one prosecution, of course, is the indictment brought by Jack Smith. So by the very terms of your analysis, Jack Smith's indictment actually counseled against and was counted against bringing charges in this case. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I don't follow your drift there.
Well, you said that there's already deterrence because there's this prosecution out there in a prior case related to classified documents. So we don't need to bring another case to establish deterrent value. That was the essence of your analysis, correct?
Congressman, what I'll say is that I will stand by the the way and the specific words in which I characterize my assessment of deterrence value of a case under the principles of federal prosecution that's on page 254 and 255 of my report.
Thank you. My time is out, but I'll just add the perverse implication here is that the administration, by the very terms of your analysis, actually made it less likely that the president would face charges by Jack Smith bringing an indictment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Okay.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 documents. First, the superseding indictment against Donald Trump in the Southern District of Florida, where he is currently facing criminal charges on 40 counts, including obstruction of justice, lying to the FBI, his unlawful, willful retention of national defense
Without objection, the indictment is
the concealment
recognized.
of documents from law enforcement, among other things. That was the shortened version. And my second document, to clarify for you, sir, Mr. Hur, from the transcription, page 82, the words are President Biden's. What month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. A searing memory. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection. The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for this hearing, and thank you so much for spending so much time with us today, Special Counsel Hur. In accordance with the law, classified information must be treated with the highest respect and also protected. And President Biden has made it clear during this investigation and long before that he agrees. In response to Mr. Hur's report, he said, and I quote, "Over my career in public service, I've always worked to protect America's security. I take these issues seriously, and no one has ever questioned that," end quote. The special counsel's report makes clear that this is unfortunately a common occurrence for classified documents to get swept up into members of Congress or executive branches officials' personal effects. And as soon as President Biden discovered that he had mistakenly kept classified material, he took swift and immediate action to ensure that those materials were returned, and he fully cooperated with every step of your investigation. President Biden's predecessor, when dealing with the issue of having classified materials, took very different steps. In 2016, Donald Trump declared, and I quote, "I'm going to enforce all the laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law," end quote. Yet when his lawyer told him that it was going to be a crime if he didn't return the classified documents that he had after NARA, the DOJ, and the FBI requested multiple times that Trump returned the classified documents, yet he hid them. Trump himself acknowledged that the same year that service members have risked their lives to acquire classified intelligence to protect our country, yet he decided that his desire to keep these documents outweighed the potential loss of life for these people if those papers got out. Not only did Trump have a legal obligation, he also had a moral obligation to all of us, and he failed to live up to that. Mr. Hur, thank you for being here today. I'd like to talk about your report regarding President Biden and some of your findings. And for the sake of time, if you don't mind just answering yes or no, please answer this question. Page 187 of your report reads, "At no point did we find evidence that Mr. Biden intended or had reason to believe the information would be used to injure the United States or to benefit a foreign nation." Is this what you reported? For the sake of time, please answer yes or no.
Congresswoman, you said page 187?
Of your report, yes.
Yes, at no point did we find evidence. Yes, that language is on page 187.
Okay, so then this is what you reported, correct? Yes.
That language is in my report.
Okay, and Mr. Hur, you acknowledged on page 12 of your report that there are, as you said, numerous previous instances in which marked classified documents have been discovered intermixed with the personal papers of former executive branch officials and members of Congress. Please, once again, can you confirm for us, yes or no, the answer whether this is what you reported?
That language appears at page 12 of my report.
Page 323 also reads, as a matter of historical context, there have been numerous previous incidents in which marked classified documents have been discovered, intermixed with the personal papers of former executive branch officials and members of Congress. Is this what you reported?
That language appears at page 323.
Thank you. Now it's my understanding that this has happened before, where classified documents are swept up into official papers. So, Mr. Hur, aside from Donald Trump, are you aware of similar instances in history where officials who have had these classified documents engaged in a months-long elaborate scheme to hide those documents from federal law enforcement officials?
The one case that comes to mind that we do address in the report is the prosecution of General Petraeus.
So are these historical examples, aside from Donald Trump, where officials instructed their aides to delete evidence pertaining to those classified documents?
That was not present in the Petraeus prosecution, no.
Okay. So the American people deserve, as we've always been saying all along here, that we deserve a leader who will not put themselves above the law, but will work with law enforcement and hold themselves accountable. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized.
Special Counsel Hur, when you determined that no criminal charges should be brought against President Biden in this matter, you focused on the specific facts surrounding the classified documents, where President Biden stored them, and on his memory and age. You wrote that President Biden's, quote, memory was significantly limited during his recorded interviews with the ghostwriter in 2017 and during his interview with the Special Counsel's Office in 2023. You also expressed concern that prospective jurors would be persuaded by President Biden's presentation as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Your assessment, however, was focused on how President Biden would currently present to a jury if he stood trial. Is that correct?
That was an element of my explanation to the Attorney General for my decision. It was not the only element.
Okay, that wasn't my question, but it was one of the things that we were considering was his current state of mind, his current memory. Correct?
One of the things that I considered would be how, if a trial, whenever a trial theoretically were to be held, how President Biden would present himself to the jury if he elected to testify.
Okay. You did not compare President Biden's current memory or condition with his memory or condition when he was in the Senate or when he left the vice presidency and took the classified documents subject to your investigation. Is that right?
Actually, I believe that's not correct, Congresswoman. One of the things that's in the report is an assessment of the president's memory based on recordings from the 2016-2017 timeframe, recordings of conversations between Mr. Biden and his ghostwriter, and comparing that with the president's memory that he exhibited during our interview of him in October of 2023. So there was a comparison there.
Okay, so, but unless there was some issue undisclosed to the American people during his 50 years in office, you found that Mr. Biden fully understood his legal responsibility related to the handling of classified materials, which is why you concluded in your report that Mr. Biden, quote, willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. You state that on page 1, correct?
I believe that what I stated on page 1 was that we identified evidence that Mr. Biden willfully retained classified information after the end of his vice presidency, but ultimately we concluded that the evidence was insufficient to warrant.
I understand that. Please listen to my question. What I'm getting at is that Mr. Biden fully understood that he could not keep classified information at his home as both a former senator and vice president. Isn't that right? He understood that, correct?
My understanding is that based on the evidence, my assessment was that a jury.
That isn't what my question was. Please listen to my question. My question was that Mr. Biden understood when he was a senator and vice president that he could not keep classified materials at his home, at his garage, and in other offices. Is that fair?
I don't think that's accurate, Congresswoman, because when Mr. Biden was vice president, he was authorized to have classified material in his home.
But after he left, he knew that he was not entitled to keep classified information at his home, correct?
After he left, there is evidence to suggest that he knew that he could not legally have classified information in his home. However, there is evidence with respect to his notebooks that he believed he was authorized to keep the notebooks at home based on precedent.
Based on precedent. You know, I guess the way that I would put it is this. President Biden knew better. He knew that he wasn't entitled to keep these documents from when he was a senator, and he knew he wasn't entitled to keep these documents after he had left the vice presidency. But because he's now suffering from an impaired memory, as you so delicately put it, he got away with it. Is that fair?
Congresswoman, what I stated in my report is that there's certainly evidence that some jurors could infer to suggest that Mr. Biden willfully retained and disclosed national defense information. But in my judgment, the likely outcome of a trial, the probable outcome of a trial, is not a conviction.
I have represented a variety of clients over the years in actions against the federal government over, in fact, several decades of time. It's been my experience that the federal government, the DOJ specifically, has essentially unlimited resources to go after and prosecute citizens and will spare absolutely no expense in doing so. It has also been my experience that the DOJ is not only overly aggressive in these cases, but makes it clear that part of the reason for such aggression is to make an example of the poor soul who is the subject of such action. In other words, so that other people will not engage in the same kind of conduct. Mr. Hur, having been a long-term DOJ prosecutor, can you please explain why those people without the last name of Clinton or Biden are typically treated quite differently and seem to be the only ones who are never held accountable for violating the law?
Congresswoman, one of the things that I explain in my report is the fact that there are historical precedents with respect to former occupants of the White House and their retention of classified materials after they leave.
I'm asking specifically about Mrs. Clinton and Mrs. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden.
Congresswoman, I don't have any opinion to articulate with respect to the investigation relating to Mrs. Clinton.
I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Hur, Special Counsel Jack Smith has charged Donald Trump with 40 counts related to his unlawful possession of classified documents. The most serious charge carries a penalty of 20 years in prison. According to the Trump indictment, Trump stored those documents at Mar-a-Lago, which, quote, hosted events for tens of thousands of members and guests, end quote. The indictment continues, quote, Trump stored his boxes containing classified documents in various locations at the Mar-a-Lago Club, including in a ballroom, a bathroom, and a shower, an office space, his bedroom, and a storage room. Mar-a-Lago is more than a mansion or a compound. It is a club with membership, with a membership program that sells access to the public. It has hundreds of people moving through it at any given time. Staffing it alone required 150 staff members. And while those classified national security documents sat in places like his ballroom, Trump hosted more than 150 social events like weddings and movie premieres, which thousands of people attended. In brief, Special Counsel Smith has alleged that Trump willfully and knowingly took highly classified documents to a location accessible by tens of thousands of people. Mr. Hur, was President Biden's residence accessible to tens of thousands of people?
No.
Did President Biden ever bring tens of thousands of people into spaces where he stored classified material?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Joe Biden advertise and sell memberships to his home that would allow members of the public to have access?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did your investigation find that Joe Biden ever hosted movie premieres at his home while classified documents were stored there?
No.
Moving on, among the 150 staff members working at Mar-a-Lago was a Trump aide named Walt Nauta. According to Special Counsel Smith, Trump ordered Nauta to move boxes of documents so that they could not be found by people looking for them. Mr. Hur, did President Biden ever direct his staff to move documents so that you or the FBI could not find them?
We did not identify evidence of that.
In fact, according to your report, as soon as Bob Bauer discovered material in President Biden's residence, he contacted John Lausch, and the president immediately consented to an FBI search of his home. Is that correct?
My report does state that.
And you found no evidence that any documents were moved prior to that search. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's in stark contrast to Donald Trump. President Biden did not obstruct your investigation. He was fully compliant. And with access to the millions of documents he gave you and dozens of hours of witness interviews he facilitated, you were able to fully and totally exonerate him of any criminal wrongdoing. I thank you, Mr. Hur. And before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an excerpt from the committee's transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antuono, former assistant director in charge of the FBI Washington Field Office, on June 7th, 2023, in which Mr. D'Antuono explained that the FBI executed a search warrant for classified material at Mar-a-Lago because there was probable cause to believe that Donald Trump did not fully comply with a subpoena to turn over classified documents.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized. Oh, excuse me. Gentleman from the ranking member is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 unanimous consent requests.
All right.
First, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the publisher's webpage for President Biden's 2017 book, Promise Me Dad, which shows that the book is a deeply moving memoir about the year that President Biden's son, Beau, died.
Objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to enter page 97 of Mr. Hur's report, which says that President Biden's book is not known to contain classified information.
Without objection.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a February 5th, 2024 letter from President Biden's counsel to Special Counsel Hur that clarifies that President Biden's 2017 book, quote, does not contain classified information, and there has never been any suggestion to the contrary, close quote.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Special Counsel Hur, for joining us here today to discuss your investigation regarding President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. This has become an issue of great interest to all Americans and, of course, to all of us here today. As is outlined in your report, despite the discovery of confidential and top-secret records located in the president's personal residence in Delaware, including in his garage, office, and basement, the department declined prosecution, and my colleagues' questions today have focused on the highlights from your report, specifically referring to President Biden's mental capacity, his willful disregard for the law as a private citizen, and how he would be perceived if presented to a jury of his peers. Dependent upon, and I'll use your words from the report, how this sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory handled and managed the storage of these confidential documents, the national security of the United States might have been put at great risk because of the president's behavior. And so one of the things we must consider today is how we can ensure that our national security will not be continually put at risk when under the leadership of the same well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Since the release of the report, to your knowledge, has the Justice Department started to analyze a damage assessment of what may have been disclosed by these documents being mishandled and any ongoing national security risks from the inappropriate storage and retention of the documents?
Congresswoman, my understanding is that such a damage assessment is underway in coordination and cooperation with the members of the intelligence community.
And do you today for us have any information about the status of that investigation or how long it might take to conclude?
I do not, Congresswoman.
I'd like to turn your attention to a discussion of the distinction between proving the underlying elements of an offense and the concept of an obstruction of justice charge. Is it correct, Special Counsel Hur, that in some circumstances as a federal prosecutor, you may investigate the underlying offense, an underlying offense, choose not to charge that offense, but still have developed sufficient evidence to charge a defendant with obstruction of justice?
I think as a matter of law, theoretically, that could occur. I can't bring to mind specific examples of that happening, but I suppose that if that were to happen, it would be a more difficult case to try from a prosecutor's
perspective. Well, the elements are distinct, though, are they not?
They are distinct elements.
And isn't it similar to a case where a federal prosecutor undergoes an investigation and ultimately doesn't pursue the original charge they were investigating, but during the course of the investigation concludes that a false statement was made to a federal law enforcement officer and brings a charge under 1001?
That could happen.
Yes. And again, there too, the elements would be different.
Correct.
And in reaching your final decision related to the declination or the recommendation to decline prosecution, you considered both the underlying elements of the offenses at issue and also the principles of federal prosecution. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the principles of federal prosecution, those are things that may vary case to case. Is that right?
The determinations under the principles of federal prosecution are very fact and circumstance dependent.
But the elements of the criminal offense are not. Isn't that also correct?
Elements are defined by law, and they do not vary from case to case.
And thus, those elements of the underlying criminal offense would be exactly the same from one defendant to the next to the next. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So you would expect, would you not, that a prosecutor who was considering the underlying offenses that you were considering here would be looking at exactly the same elements and requirements of proof that you did on the underlying charges?
Prosecutors assessing their cases under the same statutes must consider the same elements with respect to those statutes.
All right. Thank you, Special Counsel Hur. And then if we could turn back to the concept of those principles of federal prosecution, those are the additional factors aggravating or mitigating that you might consider in ultimately reaching a charge and decision here. Is that right?
They do include such things that are referred to as aggravating and mitigating circumstances.
There's one thing I want to go back to, though, to be clear. It's been said today that your report is tantamount to a total exoneration of President Biden. That's not correct, is it?
That is not correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. I yield the balance of my time to the chair.
Gentlelady is back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hur, also for your patience. You're almost to, what, 3.5 hours? So almost as much as Biden. Throughout your report, you repeatedly cite and credit a number of innocent explanations for the presence of classified materials at the president's home and other locations. Innocent explanations that you admit that you cannot refute. And I'd like to just focus on a few of them, and I'll give you citations. One of these explanations for the presence of classified documents is that a member of the president's staff maintained those documents when he was the vice president, and then mistakenly included them in sets of documents that were later sent to locations such as the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, but if you have a specific page number for me, that would help me, Congressman.
We'll get you one. That would be great. You also found that another innocent explanation to be more likely than a criminal explanation for the presence of classified documents that were found at the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. And then let's talk about the documents in the president's garage. As you noted, a reasonable juror could conclude that the location of the documents, surrounded by household junk, is not a place where a person knowingly and intentionally stores classified documents that are critical to his legacy. Instead, it looks more like a place where a person stores classified documents that he's unaware of. That's on page 209 of your report, correct?
That is something that a reasonable juror could factor into his or her consideration of whether or not the president had criminal willful intent.
Great. And you also noted that President Biden was allowed to have classified documents in his home for 8 years as vice president, and then again when he was president, and that he also had layers of staff who were responsible for assembling, carrying, storing, and retrieving these types of classified documents.
Correct.
And because of these facts, you determined it was, quote, entirely possible that the president did not know he still had some of these documents in his home when his vice presidency ended in 2017. That's on page 215. Entirely possible.
Entirely possible.
Yeah. So that's the citation. I'm going to keep going because my time is running while you're looking. So you also cite the president's cooperation with your investigation as evidence that he did not have criminal intent. And I want to quote you here because this is important. You wrote, most significantly, Mr. Biden self-reported to the government that the Afghanistan documents were in his Delaware garage and consented to the search of his house to retrieve them and other classified materials. He also consented to searches of other locations, and later in the investigation, he participated in an interview with our office that lasted more than 5 hours and provided written answers to most of our written questions. Many will conclude that a president who knew he was illegally storing classified documents in his home would not have allowed such a search of his home to discover those documents and then answered the government's questions afterwards, page 210. And then you said that you expect this argument about the president's innocence to carry real force for many reasonable jurors, because in your words, reasonable jurors will conclude that Mr. Biden, a powerful, sophisticated person with access to the best advice in the world, would not have handed the government classified documents from his own home on a silver platter if he had willfully retained those documents for years. Just as a person who destroys evidence and lies often proves his guilt, a person who produces evidence and cooperates will seem by many to be innocent. Again, page 210. As you said in your report, it would be reasonable for a juror to reach that conclusion, and that a president advised by counsel would not have informed investigators of the presence of classified documents in his home or invited agents in the search of every nook and cranny of his home or other residence, or sat for an hours-long interview, or answered pages of written questions, all going to his full cooperation and his lack of criminal intent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Hur, we got 3 more we're going to do, and then we're going to take votes, and then we'll just have a couple more after that. So I'm going to start with the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Hur, are you opposed to the U.S. Congress having access to the audio tapes of the people you interviewed during your investigation?
Chairman, I am not in a position to articulate an opinion one way or the other. That is not really up to me. I'm a former employee of the Department of Justice. I would refer you to the White House and DOJ leadership.
You're an accomplished lawyer. Is there any reason why we shouldn't, why the United States Congress shouldn't have access to the same information you had access to, and that was the basis of your decision?
Chairman, it is not for me to opine on what materials.
Well, the Justice Department released the transcripts the day of the hearing. It'd been nice if we'd had them at a more, I think, a better time for the committee to prepare for our questioning for you. They released them today. The White House and the Justice Department released them today. It'd be nice if we actually had the audio tapes too. Again, is there any reason why you can see why the American people and their representatives in the United States Congress should not have access to those tapes?
Chairman, what I can tell you is that my assessment that went into my conclusions that I described in my report was based not solely on the transcript. It was based on all of the evidence, including the audio recordings.
Great point. That's where I was going. So this was valuable evidence for you as the special counsel named to investigate this issue, valuable evidence for you to reach your conclusion, and the statements you put in your report. And all I'm asking is, shouldn't the United States Congress have access to that same information?
Chairman, again, it is not for me to weigh into what information Congress should or should not have, but what I will tell you is that the audio recordings were part of the evidence, of course, that I considered in coming to my conclusions.
I will yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky and hopefully can yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. In Chapter 8 of your book, or your report, you detail that Mr. Biden retained in his Delaware basement classified documents relating back to his time as a U.S. Senator in the 70s, correct?
Correct.
And even more Senate papers dating back to the 70s through 1991 were found in the University of Delaware, Morris Libraries, and in the Biden Senate Papers collection, correct?
Correct.
And even more Senate papers dating back to the 1970s and 1980s were found in Biden's Delaware garage.
I believe yes, that's correct.
And quote, Mr. Biden had nearly 50 years experience dealing with classified information, including as a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Judiciary, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and Vice President of the United States. and that he was deeply familiar with the measures taken to safeguard classified information and the reasons for them, correct?
That language certainly sounds familiar, Congressman, but if you have a page citation for me, I can confirm.
And as Vice President, is it correct that in 2011, Mr. Biden received advice from his staff about the need to secure classified information in the form of notes?
Correct.
Including his first counsel, Cynthia Hogan?
Correct.
And he was advised in writing in 2011 by Hogan that classified notes must be maintained in secure safes and stored in secure facility.
Correct.
His second counsel, John McGail, also advised Biden that all of Mr. Biden's records, including his notes, would be sent to the National Archives, and Biden understood and accepted that, correct?
That's correct, with the exception that Mr. McGrail was Vice President Biden's final counsel, not his second one.
All right. And on his way out, Mr. Biden was also appraised of his obligations by the National Archives staff twice more that his classified notes should be secured in a SCIF.
That particular fact is not immediately coming to mind, Congressman, but if you have a page citation, I can confirm it for you.
Well, did Mr. Biden have 30 years experience handling this information? He received advice from at least 2 separate counsels, the National Archives staff. He has demonstrated enough knowledge of the law to attack President Trump in public over the same exact issue in detail. This is where I get into this. I just have a problem with this. In your report and this testimony, a reasonable person would conclude that Mr. Biden knowingly retained national defense information and failed to deliver it to an appropriate government official, and that he knew his conduct was unlawful. And I think that's where we end up here, and that's what the point is. Over the last 3 election cycles, there's only been 3 people who have ran for president: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. All 3 of them have been accused of mishandling classified documents. Only one of them has been prosecuted. And that's what the American people see. That's what we see. We had Hillary Clinton, who ran a program called Bleach It on her server. They used hammers to destroy evidence. Joe Biden has a 50-year history of misplacing classified documents in numerous different places. All of these cases have the same underlying elements of the crime, the same fact patterns, and yet we only see one person being prosecuted. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky.
When time's expired, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, in light of what the chairman previously said, I ask unanimous consent that all transcribed interviews taken by the committee this year be made public.
There's an objection to that. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Hur. St. Louis and I are here today once again to focus on the real issues that affect our communities instead of partisan hit jobs. Let me start by saying that the potential mishandling of classified information is a serious issue, and I believe it was appropriate for the Attorney General to appoint both special counsels in the Biden and Trump cases. As my colleagues have pointed out, President Biden fully complied with the investigation conducted by Special Counsel Hur, who did not find evidence sufficient to warrant criminal charges. Despite this outcome, Republicans have used the special counsel's report to further their longstanding efforts to re-elect the former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump, who faces 40 criminal charges related to the mishandling of classified documents, including obstruction of justice. While President Biden returned all of the classified material and complied with the special counsel's investigation, let's remind ourselves what Donald Trump has said and done. He refused to turn over the classified documents in his possession to the National Archives. He is on tape sharing documents he said he could have declassified when he was president. He wrongly claimed in an interview that the Presidential Records Act allows him to do whatever he wants, and he was allowed to do everything he did. He also said on his right-wing social media platform, quote, "I'm allowed to do all of this." He continues to admit to his possession of these documents on the campaign trail. So this hearing is not a good faith oversight effort. It is just the latest in a long line of dysfunctional and destructive actions taken by this Republican majority. They don't care about responsible governance or making people's lives better. They don't have an affirmative agenda. They are throwing whatever they can at the wall and hoping it sticks, and they have zero credibility to talk about mental acuity when they support Donald Trump. The same Donald Trump who mixes up Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi. The same Donald Trump who incorrectly pronounced the words Venezuela, respected, and United States. The same Donald Trump who calls January 6 defendants hostages. And the same Donald Trump who believed bleach injections would treat COVID-19. It is deeply hypocritical for anyone who champions this man for the presidency to talk about the mental acuity of anyone else. But this is nothing new. This has been a consistent pattern of the Republican majority in this Congress. From the sham impeachment investigation that has completely collapsed to the absurd impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, Republicans have solely focused on destroying the incumbent president, destroying the Democratic Party, destroying progressive movements for social justice, all so that they can re-elect one of the worst presidents of all time. Now, it is well known that I have disagreements with President Biden on certain issues. My concerns are rooted in the desire to resolve policy matters and help him take better positions that save more lives. That's not what Republicans are doing. That's not what these investigations and attacks are about. They are trying everything they can to turn back the clock on our rights and our freedoms, and we cannot take the bait. Let's focus on policy. Let's focus on substance. Let's focus on saving and improving the lives of our constituents, not misusing the precious time and resources of this committee, not being dishonest just because it serves our political interests. We are better than that, and our country deserves better than all of this. I will continue to reject these absurd distractions from the investments we need in the communities that we represent. Let's focus on that instead of this irresponsible and easily repudiated Republican clown show. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for a number of things. First, thank you for agreeing to testify today. Second, thank you also for sharing your family's story at the beginning of your testimony. It is an extraordinary story of them coming to America. Third, let me also thank you for your in-depth investigation and your detailed report, and generally for your service as special counsel. It's not something that I think many people would look for, and certainly comes with a lot of burden, so thank you for your work. In your opening statement, you described your investigation as, quote, thorough and independent, and I agree with that. One where you attempted to give, quote, rigorous and detailed analysis. I also agree with that. And one where you say you, quote, must show your work, which we very much appreciate today. We don't normally see that. Did I recall your opening statement correctly as it relates to those quotes?
Yes, sir, you do.
In fact, as part of your investigation, you interviewed about 150 different witnesses. You looked at millions of different documents because you wanted to do a thorough investigation. Isn't that true?
Correct.
And you did this because you took your investigation extremely seriously and you wanted to reach accurate conclusions, correct?
Very much.
Then let's review some of your specific findings regarding the issues pertaining to competency and mental capacity of President Biden, because as you say, this is very important to whether or not there was criminal willful intent. As you can see, I've set forth a number of different quotes up here on this board that I've prepared, some of which I'll read to you. Page 5, you say Mr. Biden's, quote, Mr. Biden's memory was significantly limited. Then again on page 6, you say Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Then on page 207, you say Mr. Biden's memory also appeared to have significant limitations. And then again on page 208, he did not remember when he was vice president, and he did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. You finally make the statement on page 248, quote, for these jurors, Mr. Biden's apparent lapses and failures in February and April 2017 will likely appear consistent with the diminished capacities and faulty memory he showed. Those were astounding conclusions to me, and as I look through those quotes, I have to say I hearken back to my time before Congress. I was a judge, and one of the things that I oversaw was guardianships. And frankly, when I read your conclusions, red flags began to go up in my mind because I oversaw hundreds of guardianships back in Texas. And as I saw your conclusions, I begin to wonder, what does the D.C. statute say about guardianships, and how do you define an incapacitated individual in Washington, D.C.? And I want to show you this statute, because I presume, are you familiar with the statute at all?
I am not, Congressman.
So I didn't think that you'd probably reviewed that. So let me just read to you some of these, some of the definitions here. An adult whose ability to receive and evaluate information effectively or to communicate decisions is impaired to such an extent that he or she lacks the capacity to manage all or some of his financial resources. That's the first part of the definition of incapacity, an incapacitated individual under the guardianship statute in the District of Columbia. And quite frankly, I see tons of overlap from what you set forth in your testimony, in your written report, and the definition here. The phrases are almost identical. I would posit that if he cannot manage national top secret resources, I'm not sure how he can manage his personal financial resources. And given your report's findings that his memory was, quote, significantly limited, and that he is a person with, quote, diminished faculties, and with, quote, faulty memory, it makes me wonder how close he is coming to meeting this definition of an incapacitated individual, such that he should have a guardian appointed by the D.C. courts for his personhood. There is at least, I believe, a prima facie argument to say that there is substantial evidence to indicate such. And you mentioned it's not just what you've written in the report, but it was the demeanor of President Biden as you interviewed him. I'll say in conclusion, whether he does or does not meet this definition, I believe your findings raise significant concerns about his current fitness for the office of the president, and certainly his fitness going forward in the future. And I appreciate the fact that you were brazen enough to raise this issue in this report, because you knew this would be significant in your findings, but you did so based on a very significant, very detailed, very thorough, independent report, and I praise you for that, doing your duty in such a way. Thank you, Special Counsel. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Hur, we have votes on the floor. We have a few more members who will do their 5 minutes of questioning. So we're going to recess, and then we will convene 10 minutes after the conclusion of the last vote. I believe we only have a couple votes. Is that right? 2 votes. So, but, you know, Congress, that'll take a while, but we'll get back here as soon as we can. And there's food in the back room for, I think we still have some left that you're welcome to. With that, we stand in recess until 10 minutes after the last vote.